Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Comics Cube. I'm Paul, and I'm here with my friends Duy and Lamar. And today we're going to be talking about the New 52.
Why?
In why? You may well ask. So, a bit of background first. In 2011, DC Comics, in their infinite wisdom, decided to revamp their entire line of comics. They chose the arbitrary number of 52 titles. Don't know why.
I have a
They-
theory. I have a theory, but I'll tell you later.
okay. And they decided they were going to start all 52 titles from number one. Heroes had only been active for 5 years, they decided. So Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, Flash, all of them, they'd only been around for 5 years. So we were talking superheroes in their 20s here, still wet behind the ears with a whole lot of life lessons left to learn. They were integrating their Wildstorm universe of characters firmly into the DC universe. So we get to see characters like Grifter and Hellspont. Is that right?
I love
Uh,
how you mentioned Wildstorm, and the first person you think of is Grifter. Like,
yeah,
I think that says
he's
something. I don't know what that
literally.
says, but I think that says something.
It says Grifter's the only Wildstorm character I can think of. I don't know. There's that. I think he's called Hellspont, so him as well, and some other dudes. And they all had new costumes. All the heroes, Superman, Batman, everyone. They all had new costume designs by Jim Lee. This lasted for about 5 years. And then in 2016, DC kept a few bits and bobs from the New 52, but mostly kind of went back to how things were. So today we're going to talk about how we felt at the time of the New 52, what was our favorite bits from the New 52, what were our least favorite bits, and also, what's the legacy of the New 52, if any? So let's start, I think, by asking what were your thoughts when it was first announced? And what titles were you looking forward to, if any? So, Duy.
I was, I was, at the time, guys, I had written a thing on the Comics Cube website, comicscube.com, blast from the past, throwback Thursday. Um, and I said that there are too many events. There are too many events in mainstream comics to the point where it's meaningless. Because if every event is about flipping the status quo, then flipping the status quo is your status quo. Right. So there are too many events, and ultimately it's meaningless. And then they announced Flashpoint, and I remember saying, "Oh, great, another meaningless event that's not going to lead to anything." And as it turns out, the first time I say that, I was completely wrong because the New 52 upended everything. I was in a weird place with DC Comics at the time, in that I didn't particularly like the idea. I didn't really think that it was a good idea, because I remember, the reboot of Crisis on Infinite Earths, and how many more problems it caused than fixed, right? Because unless you go back to the very beginning and reset everyone from the very beginning, it's going to end up causing problems anyway. So that's what I felt about it. On the other hand, I wasn't reading DC Comics at the time. So, and then when New 52 started, I was reading DC Comics again, because I was at the very least curious as to what would happen in some of them. So you can't really say that it didn't work. I believe like the first month of the New 52, it had like, it was the first month that it beat Marvel in like unit share and dollar share for like in like the last 30 years or something. So they can't really say it didn't work in the short term. In the long term, I will answer that later because you said this is just what we thought of when it was coming out at the time. But you did say, Paul, you don't know why they picked the arbitrary number of 52. I have a theory. Dan Didio famously hates the really great weekly series 52. And if you branded something else with a number 52 in front of it, there was a chance that if you Googled 52 comics, the weekly series wouldn't be the first thing that popped up.
Do you know what? If that's true, part of me kind of admires that level of pettiness.
It's the same thing. It's like the theory that Disney made a movie called Frozen, so that if you Googled Walt Disney Frozen, you'd stop getting hit by all of these theories that Walt Disney had himself cryogenically frozen. I think that's it. I think it was a search engine thing.
Oh wow. I love that. Just like Dan Didio just upending everything and rebooting the entire DC universe just to spite Mark Waid. You know?
This man blacklisted so much talent. I don't really think professionalism was.
I'm joking, but it is utterly plausible. Wow.
That's my answer. That's what I think happened.
I buy it. I buy it. So, Lamar, same question to you. What were your thoughts when it was first announced? And is there any aspect of it that you were particularly looking forward to at the time?
Well, how can I put it? Like when I first heard about it, it was right when like Flashpoint was happening, right? And so, I was reading that, because I thought that was it was a good book to me when I first started. I was enjoying it, and so then when I hear about this, then it's like, okay, so now they're gonna do the reset thing, and then later, they were like, yeah, Flashpoint is just gonna be the thing where we use this to reset everything. And so I was like, okay, that kind of sounds like it wasn't planned, but let's see how it goes, right? And then so I'm like, okay, you figure it took DC what 50 something years before they was like, yeah, we got to start over. And then the second time, it took them what, like 20 some odd years, right? And then now they're starting over again. So I'm like, okay, this ain't looking good, right? So that's the thing. Now I'm like, the first thing in my head is like, okay, how long is it going to take y'all before you write yourselves into a problem, right? And
Not long at all.
Yeah, I'm talking day one, bro. That's what I'm saying. Day one, there was no way that type of model was going to be sustainable, and there were some really good ideas. Like when they started announcing like the creative teams, and I was like, okay, Grant Morrison on Action Comics, that's a no-brainer. And there were some other ones like George Perez, rest in power, on the Superman comic. I was like, yeah, I want to check that out. But there was a lot of other stuff that I was like, okay, maybe that'll work out, right? So I was curious about, I think like a lot of people were like, I just kind of wanted to see what was going to happen, and I thought it was kind of weird, even though I understand it from a business perspective. I thought it was kind of weird that like nothing about Batman and Green Lantern was going to change, right? But you get it, you understand why. Those are like the two franchises that are pulling cargo at the moment. So of course you don't want to mess that up. But yeah, I kind of went into it with cautious enthusiasm, I guess you could say. And pretty much I got what I thought we were going to get. I was just kind of caught off guard at how quick everything went off the rails, though. I will say that.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Do you remember in addition to the 52 titles, right? If you're talking about like this organization, in addition to the 52 titles, there were some miniseries, and one of them was The Shade, which was a spin-off of Starman. But in this new universe, the Justice Society never happened. Am I right? I'm right on that one, right? Like the Superman and Batman, etc. They were the first ones, so the Justice Society never happened. Therefore, the Legacy Heroes never happened. Therefore, Starman supposedly never happened. So we've got like 12 issues of The Shade, which are excellent issues, with not a single mention of the Golden Age Flash, who was his longtime rival, or Jack Knight Starman, who is like the entire reason his whole series exists.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that was, I think, right there, you've hit the nail on the head with one of the big problems of the New 52, is that a lot of writers just kind of told the stories they were going to tell anyway, and just kind of subtly didn't mention certain aspects, so it kind of fitted in, but didn't.
pretty much.
Yeah.
Like, and then Deathstroke shows up in his new 52 costume in that one, and I'm like, I don't know where this takes place.
And he's kind of in it for like one cliffhanger for issue 1, and then he buggers off again. So you kind of get the impression that someone was saying to James Robinson, "Yeah, just get Deathstroke in there for an issue, just to show this is the New 52." Yeah.
Let me give an open message to anyone working at DC Comics. If you do anything Starman related, no one cares what continuity, if it's in continuity or not with what's currently going on. We only care if it's in continuity with the Starman series from the 90s. That's it. That's the end of my little rant there.
Of course.
Well, so I'm going to take you back to myself, but where I was in 2011 now when I heard the news. And initially I reacted how all comic fans react when they hear that change is in the air. I fear and disgust and and outrage. I wasn't happy.
Outrage? What?
Outraged I was. What? Are they changing things? I don't like change. That's why I read comics. But then I started getting excited. Because the thing about me is, I started, like probably yourselves, I started reading comics in the late 80s, early 90s. So we were still getting that sort of, post-Crisis on Infinite Earths sort of revamp vibe. Even though the big revamps had happened, I was sort of catching up on them when I first got into comics. So I really sort of cut my teeth as a comics fan on things like Man of Steel and Mike Barron's Flash, and Batman Year One, and all these really exciting revamps of major heroes that have, mostly stood the test of time. Year One, we're still talking about that. Wally West as the Flash, that carried on for years. So I have always been quite excited at the idea of being in on the ground floor of a change like that, because I started reading comics at a time when I just missed it. I just missed all that exciting revamp, and I had to play catch up. But now's a chance to be in on the ground floor. And I got a similar excitement a few years earlier in about 1999 when Marvel announced that John Byrne was going to revamp Spider-Man for Spider-Man Chapter 1.
Why do you do this to yourself? Why?
And I got really excited about that. And I thought, wow, I'm going to be in on the ground floor for this big revamp of Spider-Man. That's amazing. And we all know what happened there. So,
did you know that the Osborns and Sandman are related because they have the same hair?
Oh, God. So for those viewers, listeners who don't know, that whole Spider-Man revamp didn't really take, for a variety of reasons. That is a separate podcast. But I didn't learn my lesson. And I was like, oh, wow, yeah, I'm going to be in on the ground floor for a big revamp of the DC heroes. And I started getting really excited. And it also helped my excitement that certain characters who were my favorite characters weren't in a good place, I would say, at the time, kind of 2010, beginning of 2011. The Superman books weren't in a good place, I would argue. You had Action Comics, which was great at the time. It was written by Paul Cornell, drawn by Pete Woods, and it was all about Lex Luthor. So Superman wasn't in it, it was a great run, but it wasn't about Superman. And then you had J. Michael Straczynski writing Grounded in the main Superman book, which was like, I don't want to be too negative, but it was diabolical. It was terrible.
Wow.
It was
Wow,
so bad.
I've never heard Paul be this harsh.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I'm actually a
I
big
didn't want to
fan
go
of
in
Straczynski.
all that hard, but god dang, wow.
Wow, like I don't want to be negative, but it was diabolical.
I mean, I really like Straczynski. I'm a big fan of his generally, but this Grounded was so bad that even Straczynski got sick of it and left halfway through. Which isn't a ringing endorsement of his own idea. And it had to be finished off by someone else, Chris Robertson, who did the best he could, I would say.
Yeah.
And there hadn't been consistency for a while in the super books. There was a lot of chopping and changing all the time. Different creators coming on, going off, creators doing good stuff, getting derailed by events. So what I was looking forward to with the New 52, particularly with the Superman books and Grant Morrison, my favorite writer coming onto Action, I was looking forward to consistency. So I was really excited about getting in on the ground floor. I was really excited about potentially getting a consistent run of good Superman comics. Did that happen?
Okay, fair. I just want to put it in context that right before all of this terrible stuff that you mentioned, all this diabolical, terrible stuff that you mentioned, we had a really good run of Superman comics with Jeff Johns and Gary Frank.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
And why that creative team didn't stay on the book, I will never know unless one of you comes on the show, Jeff and Gary. But it just made so much sense to me that they stay on the book because it was such an excellent run. But then you moved into the new Krypton stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that was the new Krypton stuff, where correct me if I'm wrong, but they introduced a lot of changes to Superman, and it was all like super duper hyped. And then at the very end, they reset everything. Like all of the new characters are back to like not existing. Superman is back to where he was right before. So I feel like that was happening a lot in DC at the time, where like they couldn't really settle on a direction. Do you remember the mini series, the maxi series DC Legacies?
Yes.
So DC Legacies was promoted as being the Marvels of DC, like the history of DC, the DC universe as seen through the eyes of one dude. And then at the very end, dude is like, well, anyway, that's how I remember it. I could be wrong. So I feel like there was a lot of DC at the time, like having like good ideas to begin with and then not following that through. So did a consistent run of Superman happen after the New 52 that you were looking forward to, Paul? I think all we need to do to answer that question is to look at the look of apathy on Lamar's face.
Wow. And that was 100% not intentional, right? It just kind of happened that way, right?
Well, before we get into the sort of nitty gritty of the quality of the books that we got, let's just focus a little more on what we were looking forward to. Lamar mentioned like George Perez on Superman. I too was very excited about that. Grant Morrison on Action Comics. I was thrilled about that. Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo. I wasn't familiar with a lot of Greg Capullo at the time, but I loved Scott Snyder based on his Detective Comics run. So I was really looking forward to that. Yeah, so what were you guys looking forward to from the New 52? Lamar, what else were you looking forward to?
Um, I was, honestly, I was interested in where the Green Lantern stuff was going to go and what they were going to do next. Because, you know, with the Green Lantern, you're talking about since like 2005, right? You have the steady buildup of all of these things that were constantly happening. And it seemed like you thought that they couldn't do anything else, they did something else, right? And they just kept smashing the whole thing. And by the time you come around to like the New 52 thing, it's like, okay, well, how does this work with everything else that's changing? And then, you know, they're like, well, we're not going to really change anything. We're just going to keep it pushing. And I was cool with that, you know, but it was one of those things where I was like, they're going to have to do something. So it's just like, what are they going to do? Because it seems like the whole event thing around that time. And that was one of the other things too with the New 52. Like, it was like there was events like every couple months, right? And so it's just like, okay, well, how does this stuff fit? So I was curious with the Green Lantern book, but then some of these other books that unfortunately didn't last, that had a lot of potential. And you know, and that's one thing I can say about it is that they were just trying stuff they had never tried before.
Yeah,
And
that was you got to
yeah,
admire them for
yeah,
for trying.
yeah, you got to do it. But I think just with some of those other characters that had never had their own book before, like you look at like Cyborg, for example, right? Um, you know, like you have to kind of bring people along, you know, to that, you know, and not just, you know, do it, you know, the way they did it. It was kind of, you know, it was kind of like, I don't know, it was like they rushed it, you know, instead of just bringing them along, you know. But just seeing characters like that get their own books and just being like, okay, you know, maybe this will work if they stick with it. But then, you know, it was like, you know, if you wasn't selling 100,000 in the first 3 months, you out of here, you know. And you know, so but just being able to see how some of that unfolded, I think that was another thing that I was really interested in. You know, just like, okay, now what character are they going to try this with next? You know, and then it's like, okay, well, who do you think would be a good character who hasn't had their own book yet? You know, that really deserves it. You know, and I remember thinking, man, I wish they could have had, you know, this character instead of this one. They should have tried, you know, but so, and that part in part kept me coming back just to see what they would do. But it was just more of that approach, I think, was probably the most interesting aspect of it for me.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Duy? What were you looking forward to?
I was looking forward to the Superman books, although I didn't read Action at the time. There were other reasons for that. That's a whole separate podcast. But the you know, Superman had, you know, George Perez on it, so that was pretty much an automatic buy for me. And it was, you know, it's George on Superman. How could I not? How could I not buy it? And then can talk about that later.
Yeah.
I got the first few issues of the Flash. The Flash was Francis Manapul, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it wasn't Jeff Johns writing him anymore.
No, it's Francis Manapul and Brian Bucalato.
Yeah.
Right. So like I got the Flash. I'm looking at the list now, trying to remember what I was buying at the time. I was really interested in the Flash. I was interested in um I completely forgot that like Voodoo had her own title. I was interested in Swamp Thing. But the big thing that I was buying, and I feel like this is going to factor in later when we talk about how the New 52 eventually ends, is J.H. Williams III's Batwoman, which was another thing that was mainly unaffected because Batwoman prior to the New 52 existed mostly in a silo, you know, in a little universe created by Rucka and Greg Rucka and J.H. Williams. And I was really looking forward to seeing where they would take it, even with Greg Rucka leaving, which I guess should have been an omen.
Yeah,
To
yeah, yeah.
begin with.
Yeah, right on the wall with that one.
Yeah, I feel like the writing was on the wall with that one. But and the other one that I haven't mentioned is Wonder Woman, just because Cliff Chang was on the art.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was also excited about Wonder Woman. I was excited about Flash. You mentioned Greg Rucka leaving there. That was a big thing about the New 52, was that lots of artists were getting a shot at writing. And as a fan at the time, it was a very unknown quantity. You were like, this could go either way. Like Francis Manapul, I loved his art, but I was thinking, what's he going to be like as a writer, and what's Brian Bucalato going to be like as a writer?
David Finch was on Batman: The Dark Knight.
Yeah, exactly. David Finch on Batman: The Dark Knight. So there was a lot of that happening, and it kind of made you think. And it could have, it was stuff that could go either way. So yeah, like Ethan Van Sciver was writing Firestorm with Gail Simone. You didn't know where it was going to go.
That's an odd pairing in retrospect. That's an odd pairing in retrospect.
Yeah, Gail Simone and Ethan Van Sciver. If you told someone now that they had been paired together, they'd look at you like you were crazy.
Like, what?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I forgot to bring this up actually, but I think in 2012, David Finch came here to the Philippines, and he was like my first ever interview or something.
Oh, wow.
So I interviewed David Finch, and I asked him about it. I asked him like what the whole thing with the New 52 was, how things have changed, are the working conditions different? And he basically said that the thing that was emphasized to them was that books weren't coming out on time, and now they had to come out on time. And if they were going to miss a deadline, they were going to get a fill-in artist. Either way, the book was going to come out on time, period. That was the big thing. I don't know if I believe that, if that's the big thing that they were, that they were doing. But this is basically what he said, right? He said, the work environment has changed in the last year or so. I think DC looked at where sales were going. Things weren't good last year, especially the beginning of last year. So that's the beginning of 2011. They looked at what was working and what wasn't working. And I think the main thing that wasn't working is just that books were coming out at an unreliable schedule. With digital comics becoming more and more important, in order for that to work, I don't really know all the intricacies, but I do know that they have to come out exactly on time for that to work. They told me early on that these books absolutely have to come out when they have to come out. I didn't really take it seriously because that's what they always say. But then I realized they were serious. If the books didn't come out exactly when they said it would come out, I was going to have a fill-in artist. They actually already have lined up a fill-in artist for Batman: The Dark Knight, because understandably, they didn't trust me to do it on my own. And I didn't want to go down that way. I wanted that book to be my book, and for that to happen, I had to have it come out on time. And it's a good thing, because this is really the first time I've been on a proper schedule for 6 years.
I can believe that. I can believe that was a priority for them at the time, because I remember after Infinite Crisis, there was a feeling of momentum, and there was a feeling of excitement, because I really enjoyed Infinite Crisis, and I was quite excited about this whole 1 year later thing they did afterwards, where they skipped forward a year and everyone was kind of in a slightly different place. And I just remember at the time, the momentum was kind of spoiled by late books. For example, you mentioned like Jeff Johns is Superman. Now, in retrospect, that is a golden run. But I remember at the time, it was kind of undermined by the fact that it was so late, especially that first arc that Jeff Johns did with Richard Donner, and I believe it was Henry Cubitt, Last Son.
Last Son, yeah.
And that was super late.
The annual with the payoff was super late. I remember that.
Yeah. And I think the reason they put that in an annual, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the reason they put that payoff in an annual is so they could just get on with the book with another writer.
I can believe that, actually.
Yeah. So, but on the other hand, like in retrospect, all we remember is a really good run, right? Like All-Star Superman, that was really late, but who cares? Because you've got this book for the ages is the end result of it. Like, so I'm kind of torn on whether it should be a priority or not.
The difference though, Paul,
Mm,
is the All-Star Superman is its own book, its own universe. It affects nothing else. So
that's true.
that's fine. That's fine. Take all the time in the world that you need. The
Yeah,
counterpoint is Doomsday Clock,
yeah, yeah,
which is a beautifully drawn book, but for it to have the impact that it was going to have, it had to come out on time, and it didn't.
yeah. I think that's still happening now in the current DC books because Jeff Johns is doing a lot of sort of universe building or multiverse building in Justice Society and his sort of new Golden Age themed books. But they're so late, it kind of feels like he's doing his own thing in his own corner, and everything else is carrying on regardless
Mm,
now, and it's
yeah,
having no impact.
it's having
So
no
yeah, you're right.
impact, but it
Yeah,
is a little nice to see Jeff back in the Golden Age a bit.
I mean it is. Yeah, I mean I read Stargirl Lost Children recently, and it was fantastic. So,
It's really his wheelhouse more than anything else. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
anyway, back to the New 52.
Yeah, yeah. We digress. So, I guess now let's move on
No,
to
no,
like the new.
what were you looking forward to aside from the Superman books?
Oh yeah, well, the Superman books. I was looking forward to Snyder and Capullo on Batman. Like you, I was looking forward to Flash because
Yeah.
I really like Francis Manapul's art, but I was nervous because I didn't know how they'd both be as writers. So I was nervous about that. I was looking forward to Legion because I was really enjoying Paul Levitz's run at the time on Legion of superheroes, and I was looking forward to the spin-off book Legion Lost because I think Legion of superheroes members marooned
Yeah.
in the present day is a strong premise that's gone well before.
It always
Um,
does well.
well, as we shall see, not always. um, I was. What else was I excited about? I was excited about Dan Jurgens and George Perez on Green Arrow, just because I love those two, and I love Green Arrow.
Mhm.
And what else? Oh, Batman and Robin, Peter Tomasi and Patrick Gleason on Batman and Robin, just because I love Damian Wayne. And because I am such a big Jeff Johns fan, as should be apparent now, I was really looking forward to Jeff Johns on Justice League and Jeff Johns on Aquaman. I was super excited about. I remember at the time we'd had Green Lantern Rebirth, we'd had Flash Rebirth, both written by Jeff Johns, and I was really hoping for an Aquaman Rebirth. And we just had Aquaman feature really prominently in Brightest Day, written by
Uh-huh.
Jeff. So I was super excited on the back of this about Jeff Johns doing Aquaman. So yeah, that's what I was.
You mentioned Justice League, which, if I remember right, is the first New 52 comic to come out.
Yes,
Yep.
that brings us nicely now into them coming out. That
But
came out first on its own.
I want to
Yeah.
say, so I don't know if I looked forward to it because, as is noted, I'm not the biggest Jim Lee fan.
Mm.
So I thought it was either gonna feel like a Jeff Johns comic, which at the time was a recipe for me loving it, or it was gonna feel like a Jim Lee comic. And after I read the first issue, I had decided that it felt like a Jim Lee comic.
Yes, it did. Yeah, yeah.
And
So I
you
think
know
that
what's
brings us. God, sorry,
oh,
Lamar.
I was just gonna say real quick to speak to what you were saying about the Aquaman rebirth. If
Mm.
I'm remembering this right, and the people in the comments after this comes up, they'll correct me if I'm wrong. Um, it seems to me like Jeff Johns basically wrote the Aquaman segment. He basically was saying, "Yeah, that's Aquaman rebirth," right?
Mm.
And that he said that his original plan for the Justice League, if the New 52 didn't happen, that Aquaman was going to be the leader of the Justice League, right? And the part in the Justice League comic where he was like, where he basically was like, if y'all need a leader, I vote for me, right? Like that was actually supposed to be in the Justice League joint. you know, it was like, so he just ended up putting it in there. But basically it was supposed to be a thing where like I think he said something like, yeah, you know, well, if y'all want to lead it, you know, I'm always up for it or whatever. And then, you know, they get to looking around and they're like, hey, you know, that actually ain't a bad idea. And then he ends up being the leader of the Justice League or whatever. I just wanted to mention that real quick, you know, before we went on. Yeah.
That's interesting that you say that, because we were talking about like the Superman books not being in a great place or a consistent place at the time. I don't think the Justice League books were in a great place at the time either. They'd gone through a lot of different writers. Yeah, there was Brad Meltzer, then there was Dwayne McDuffie, and Dwayne McDuffie left very quickly for good reasons on his part, I think, from what I remember.
Very, very good reasons on his part.
Yeah. And I think James Robinson come on it, and James Robinson, who I absolutely love. But I remember that run not really clicking with me. Because he started off with Cry for Justice, didn't he? That miniseries Cry for Justice.
It's so bad.
Yeah.
I love you, James, but yeah, Cry for Justice is not one of my favorites.
Nah,
the reason
art was crazy though.
The reason his Justice League run doesn't resonate is because he used not the main guys. So like he replaced everyone. So instead of Superman, it was Supergirl. Instead of Batman, it was Nightwing. Instead of Wonder Woman's Dawn Troy. That's the Titans.
Yeah. It was neither one thing nor the other. It wasn't the Justice League. It wasn't the Titans. It just didn't click.
Yeah, it couldn't decide what it wanted to be.
Yeah. And I remember it. I gotta mention this. It's not anything to do with anything, but it's just so stupid. It's something that was happening around this time in the Justice Society books. Do you remember they dressed Alan Scott as a gigantic lantern?
Yeah. I remember that. I've been trying to forget it ever since.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember
it. Everyone Google this, right? Around this time, 2010, in the Justice Society books, Alan Scott started wearing an armor that was lantern shaped. So they literally dressed him as and don't get me wrong, I mean, he's always had a silly costume, Alan Scott, but it's always worked, you know? He kind of looked a bit like a wizard, you know, with those clashing colors. I always really liked it, but this was absurd. He even had a big handle coming out of his shoulders.
Is it inspired by his Kingdom Come look?
It is a little bit.
Yeah, that's what they said. You know,
yeah,
I think that if that's the case, they took the wrong lesson from it. You know what I mean? Because like you just was not supposed to do that. Because his Kingdom Come costume was wild. Like it was great, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh my lord.
Have you found it?
Yeah, you've never seen that before.
It's really bad. I told you I wasn't reading DC at this time.
Yeah, that's what you missed, man.
Gosh, dude.
It's really bad. This is really bad.
Yeah.
I mean, this has got nothing to do with the new 52, but I just had to mention it. We'll have to show a picture on the YouTube video.
Of course. Oh my goodness. This is the worst costume I've ever seen.
It's so bad.
Anyways, back to the new 52.
Yeah. So the new 52 begins, and it begins with Justice League. And okay, so like you say, it is a Jim Lee comic. It's very sort of reminiscent of early Image comics, and it's very much Jeff Johns writing for Jim Lee, I think.
Yeah.
And it's got this sort of like big, stupid action movie feel to it. Like a Michael Bay film, you know. And everyone hates it. Everyone I talk to hates it, right? And I get it. I know why they hate it. And they point to reasons why they hate it. And I'm like, yeah, that sucks. But I love it. It's so good. I've bought the trade to it since. It's so big and stupid, and it's Jim Lee on fine form. But it's such a wonderful, simple introduction to every single one of those characters. And And just
Never change, Paul.
oh, I love it. And it's just like the dynamic between Green Lantern and Flash and Green Lantern and Batman. And you can really see they're pushing Batman and Green Lantern to the front
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Mhm.
I guess because their books are the biggest selling at the time.
Yeah, doesn't Superman not even show up until the end of the first issue?
Yeah, to the end of the
Yeah.
first issue. And Superman, he's practically monosyllabic, you know, he is big guy punching things, you know. And it's very much the version of Wonder Woman that loves waving her sword about, you know, that kind of, oh, I'm a warrior Wonder Woman, you know. And all of them except for Flash are all really super arrogant and kind of unlikable, you know. But I don't know why. I just it fills the brief, you know. It does exactly what it says on the tin. I absolutely love it. And Jim Lee is on top form. And they just have a big scrap with Darkseid, and it's so cool.
Okay, I'm going to fight you now.
Yeah, go for it, go for it, go for it. And I'm not going to disagree with anything you say because you're right.
So one of the things that I remember this. One of the things we all were like, what the F about when we saw the preview was like, why do they all have like V-necks?
Yeah,
right.
I'm stupid.
They all have like coordinated V-necks, and I went to bat for these people before anything came out, and I said, sure, that's coordinated. I'm sure it's a uniform. No. It's just coincidentally, all of these superheroes decided that they were all going to have armored V-necks, including the Flash, running around in heavy armor because that's what Jim Lee decided. The second thing is you introduce Darkseid in your first comic only to have him lose.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
That's a terrible idea, Paul. See, Lamar agrees with me.
Yeah, I know. I'm not disagreeing with you.
And the final thing for me is, you're right, Jim Lee's on top form. It fills the brief. Everyone's unlikable. For a comic that was supposed to usher everyone into the 2010s, sure felt a lot like your cliche 90s comic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well,
and that's why now we have fought.
No. You've hit it on the head there, something that was wrong with the New 52. And we can talk about this a bit more as we go along. But I feel like the impression you get in retrospect that it was so rushed that all they could get to help with this was the old guard. And it was so rushed that the only point of reference they had for like big upheaval in comics that's going to get the readers in, that's artist focused, which is kind of what they wanted. The only point of reference they had for this was the 90s. So that's what they went for. Everything had this 90s feel to it. It didn't feel like it was good, that it was forward looking, and that it was the wave of the future. It felt like, you know, it just felt like you said 90s. And Justice League encapsulated that feeling, I think, you know. But I still love it. I still think it's brilliant. It's fun, you know. It's big.
Lamar, back me up here.
Lamar, what do you think of Justice League?
You know, I thought it was like, when I was reading it, I thought it was a weird comic, like the way it's paced, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like you said, it starts out with Batman and Green Lantern, which I kind of expected, right? Because you're talking about Jeff Johns and Jim Lee, so those are their guys, right? So you can expect that. And there was a lot of weird stuff that happened.
Oh, those are their guys. I didn't think about it that way.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so, you know, once I was like, yeah, so I could see that being the case, right? And I didn't really get thrown until Batman's on the rooftop and he takes his mask off. And he tells someone he volunteers his identity to somebody he doesn't know. So I was like, okay, this is where I'm starting to check out, right? But as it goes on, and then somebody's in was it Batman, I think, when Superman was being mind controlled, and then You know, he was like, the world needs you, the world needs Superman. He's trying to give him this pep talk so he can shake the mind control. And I was like, wait a minute. How is he that guy already? Right? Like, you know, just thinking about it, like, how does that work? Because you just got rid of everything, and you know, these guys have only been running around like this for a couple of years. So like, that hasn't been established that he's that guy yet, right? Because this is the first comic. So it's not like, you know, there's a Superman comic where they take you through those motions. Like, how does this happen? Right?
Mhm.
And then you have Darkseid, right? Which like we were talking about, you know, and they basically just dogpiled Darkseid, and then he was like, Dr. Claw, I'll get you next time, Gadget, you know, and then he disappears, right? And then, you know, and then they're like, hey, we might as well just stick together. And then, you know, they do that. I just thought it was a weirdly paced comic, right?
Yeah.
Because it was kind of like all of these things were happening, and there's no real reason for it other than they kind of have to happen. And
Yeah.
the only reason why they have to happen is because somebody who wasn't writing the comic said they had to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that this was the comic that I just was like, okay, if all of these books are going to be like this, there's probably going to be some issues later, right? And I think when I read that, that was when I was like, yeah, I don't know how this is going to go, you know. But I mean, if you separate yourself from that, there was some really cool stuff in it, like Aquaman stabbing Darkseid in the eye with the trident. Like, that was fly, like, you know, like that kind of stuff. Like, you know, I thought that was dope, you know, because they just established you know, Aquaman is this dude you really don't want to mess with, which as an Aquaman fan, you know, I enjoyed that, you know, and I thought that was something they should have been playing that up a long time before that, you know. But you know, yeah, it just was one of those things where I was like, I understand why, like, the audience that they're trying to capture, they would love something like this, right?
Mm.
But it's just like, it's just not my cup of tea. So
I get it.
yeah.
Aquaman stabbing him with a trident is a badass thing. I just think it's a
Yeah.
badass thing that you do later after Darkseid has kicked everyone's ass.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a
Yeah,
there's a
absolutely.
feeling of like having your cake and eating it, isn't it? You know,
Yeah,
there's a
yeah.
feeling of like, we want these moments without having to bother doing the build up to these moments.
Right. Yeah.
Like, we want these connections between characters without having established these connections
Mhm.
between characters. It's rushed. The whole kind of feeling to the whole thing is rushed, but it kind of works for me in this story specifically. I love how fast paced it is. I love how Batman and Green Lantern straight away are fighting a parademon, and that is the start of issue 1, you know. And then the cops come and they fight the cops, and then they fight Superman, and then Green Lantern phones Flash, and they're fighting Flash, and you know, it's just something's bam, 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 and I really love that, and I really love it as a statement, you know, like, this is what we're doing now.
Yeah, it's a high energy book. There's no question about it.
Yeah,
There's all
yeah.
this stuff happening. Yeah.
But like you
Fair.
said, if this is what we're doing with everything, then we've got a problem, like you said. So
I agree, because like I remember looking at the slate of 52 books, just the covers, and I thought at least 40 of these books look like they're grim and gritty dark. And maybe 10 of them look like they're lighthearted fun. So it just didn't feel like, it felt like 52 books, but it didn't feel like a diverse set of 52 books.
Right.
No,
Right.
no, it didn't. No. So, well, let's talk about these books then. I'm going to share with you some of my favorites now, some that I think did, and I'm going to concentrate on the first run that came out from that first 52. So, Action Comics, Grant Morrison, that's my favorite. I loved it. I thought it was so good, and it was really, along with Justice League, I think it was one of the few books that were really fulfilling the promise of the New 52. It's like, here is a version of Superman that you have never seen before. It was a revamp of Siegel and Schuster's, you know, two-fisted champion of the oppressed, but it was done in a thoroughly modern style. And you also got like to see that version of Superman fighting mind-bending, interdimensional Grant Morrison style threats, but he was still Siegel and Schuster's Superman fighting those threats, and we'd never seen that before. So that was thrilling. I loved how it felt like it was so ahead of its time, you know, just Superman shouting at cops to be better, dangling businessmen off the roof, you know. I like we it was just it was the most 2011, it was the most 21st century book the New 52 were doing. Everything else was looking backwards to the 90s, like you say, but this felt, we are saying something about Superman that's new, we are saying something about the time you are living in as well. And that was thrilling to me as well. The only problem with this book was, again, you know, we were talking earlier about they obviously had a brief to hit the deadlines. So we had Rags Morales not drawing every book, and we had fill-in artists. Some of them, like Brent Anderson, filled in, and he really got on board with the style that Rags Morales were doing. But then we had other fill-in artists, like I think, was it Brad Walker, I think, and a couple of others who were very good, but were completely different from Rags Morales or anyone else, you know, and didn't gel with the style of the books. You got this sort of, again, this inconsistent feeling when what you really needed was consistency.
I agree with that. And I think the
yeah,
sad thing about that is that of all of the books in the New 52, Action is the one that could have waited for Rags to be done because it takes place in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they could have waited for that. But other than that, I mean, I still read that run now, and I love it, and it stands on its own, separate from the New 52, as just a great run of comics.
It's excellent. It's an excellent run. Like Grant Morrison's Action Comics is an excellent run. I think the great thing about it is that it doesn't even try to be Grant Morrison's Superman in JLA or Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman. Right? It's a completely new take. It's a completely new interpretation. I think that book on its own stands on its own. It could be inspiration for anyone like looking to start a new, you know, a new Superman adaptations. Like that would be great. The thing that I didn't like about Action Comics is when they finally put him in the armor, because I'm sure he had a directive that he had to explain where the Kryptonian armor that looks like all the other armors, like where the Kryptonian armor came from. And it just, he looked so much cooler in the t-shirt and the jeans.
Yeah, absolutely. The t-shirt and the jeans are so good. And the thing about Jim Lee's armor, just to go off on a bit of a tangent here, the thing about all his costume designs, they only look good when Jim Lee draws them, and a few select other. So Superman's armor, for example, it looks fantastic when Jim Lee's drawing it. A few other artists later on drew it well, like Aaron Kuder, I remember, really drew it well. But you had George Perez, who's a fantastic artist, obviously just the best DC Comics artist ever, basically, you know, along with Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, maybe. But you know, he's fantastic, but he couldn't make that armor look good because it wasn't his style, because it's that Superman armor was such a specific Jim Lee style.
I mean, George probably deserved that after designing the Nightwing costume.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, so that was the problem with Jim Lee's designs, is that they weren't sort of these kind of universal costumes that, you know, artists can put their own stamp on whilst, you know, staying true to the design. They were very specifically Jim Lee designs. So it was a real shame that had to come into Grant Morrison's run. But it didn't spoil it overall, I don't think. You know, it's only a very minor thing. I mean, the whole thing.
No. It comes in towards the end. It's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. So the other book I loved was Snyder and Capullo on Batman. I thought, you know, their Court of Owls thing was absolutely great. They just straight away put a stamp on the Batman universe that has become as iconic as any of the other villains. The Court of Owls, it's turned up in other media. It turned up in Gotham. It's turned up in the games. And then they went from there, they went on to like just a fantastic Joker story, just a really creepy Joker story. Where like for some reason he's got his face off. But it's a great, just the idea of the Joker being in love with Batman is so creepy, but I love it.
I mean, there is a whole thing about whether or not the Joker is queer coded, which there's an essay of in The Man Who Laughs, exploring the Clown Prince of Crime, essays about the Joker, written by Valentino Rossi. Is the question is the Joker gay? Queer representation as a Clown Prince of Crime, which you can buy on Amazon. The three of us also wrote other things in it. Proceed.
Highly recommend that book. Yeah. I also love The Flash. Do you know what? When people say like Wally West has got all these great runs, and you could like say, check out Mark Waid's Wally West Flash run, check out Jeff Johns' Wally West Flash run, check out this, check out that. Nobody can say that for Barry, people say. And I say, no, check out Francis Manapul and Brian Bucalato's Flash run. It's absolutely brilliant. I love it. I've got the omnibus, big fat omnibus of the entire run. They come up with these great villains like Mob Rule, who's a childhood friend of Barry, who every time a bit of him gets chopped off, it grows into another version of himself. I love that. And that they bring out a new Reverse Flash who hasn't been used since, Daniel West, who's Iris West's other brother. And he's great. And it's just and it looks beautiful.
It's a beautiful book. It's a beautiful book.
Yeah, beautiful book. They are doing like such imaginative ways of showing speed, such imaginative ways of showing Barry's powers, such imaginative ways of laying out a page. But it's not like, look how clever we are. You know, it's all in service of the storytelling. It's such a great comic.
But that's also the advantage of having an artist who is a writer.
Right? Exactly. So the promise of getting your artists to write, this is the book that promise was fulfilled on, was The Flash, I would argue. It really was. I really cannot recommend that run enough. So those are and of course Aquaman by Jeff Johns was exactly, it's like I'm almost not raving about that as much. It's because I was expecting it to be good, and it was good. You know, it just utterly it didn't surprise me because I was expecting it to be good.
Back to The Flash, I want to say that when I said out of 52 books, 40 looked like they were grim and gritty dark, The Flash was one of the 12 that were not.
Yeah, it wasn't at all. It was just really just such a great book.
I want to ask, since you bring up Aquaman and you two were such big Aquaman fans, that after the first issue of Aquaman, there's one scene that went viral. Lots of people had a lot of opinions about this one scene, which is the scene where Aquaman goes on land, goes into a restaurant, and orders some fish. Or does he order some fish? Whatever. He gets made fun of, and they say like, "Oh yeah, you talk to fish, right?" And he's like, "I don't talk to fish. Fish are too." Fish's brains are too small. Like what I do is like, and then there's a whole John Byrnian like explanation as to what he actually does. What do you guys think of that particular scene?
I've got no objection to it personally. I figure like a guy who lives under the sea, he probably would eat fish. Like a lot of people who live on land eat meat. You know. I don't have a problem with that. And like we could communicate with a pig. Maybe we could get a pig or a sheep, perhaps a better example. We can impose our will on a sheep, right? But in the sense that sounds really bad. I wish I had.
That's too late now. You can't take it back. This is the internet. It's out there now.
What I'm saying is we herd sheep, right? We farm these animals. But that doesn't mean we can talk to these animals, and we still eat them. We have and a lot of us don't have a problem with that. But on the other hand, having said that, in Peter David's Aquaman run in the 90s, he was shown having full-on conversations with sea life, and I kind of prefer that, even though it's sillier. So sorry, Lamar, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I didn't have a problem with it, and I'll tell you why. It's not really because of anything that Aquaman does or says. It's more because you got people on the internet that and you go into the comic shops and stuff like that, that that's what they think, and they think that they're being snarky and edgy saying things like that. So just seeing Aquaman deal with somebody like that and just being like, hey man, look, I don't talk to fish, I have telepathy, right? And so I actually ran into a guy like that. I had on an Aquaman t-shirt. I was in the record shop, and I just was like, dude, I'm not. And he said that, like, you know what, Aquaman, Aquaman's stupid. The only thing he can do is talk to fish. And I was like, man, I'm not having this conversation with you, bro. Like, I just told him straight up, like, can you just ring my stuff up, please? Because we're not doing this today. So seeing Aquaman actually deal with somebody like that, and then being like, and the guy was like, wait a minute, you can't order fish and chips, and he's like, and so it's like, man, listen, let me tell y'all something. If you drop a cow, just put a cow on a crane and drop it in the ocean, something in the ocean is going to eat that cow. Now, I don't know why you would think that that wouldn't be the case, right? But that cow was going to get ate, right? So, and, it's stuff in the ocean that eat fish, like what you were just saying earlier, so it's like I just seeing it dealt with that way, and it was a really brief scene. They didn't spend a lot of time on it, so obviously we all know when you're just hungry and you just want something to eat and people are trying to talk to you and you don't know them, if you've been to a restaurant, especially in America, you've experienced that, right? So I understand the frustration, but yeah, that part I didn't have a problem with. But deep down, I also agree with Paulie. I think it's cool if he just has conversations with fish, because when I'm on the job, I pass by farms and stuff, and if the cows and things like that are close enough to me where they can hear me, I talk to them, but I know that they don't understand what I'm saying. But I talk to them anyway because I enjoy it, But yeah.
Paul, you're continuing on about the ones you enjoyed.
Well, I could go on for a bit more, but I think I'm going to turn it over to you guys now. What ones leapt out at you as your favorites of those New 52 books? So, Duy, you go first.
I liked one book. Well,
Yeah.
okay, I liked Superman. I mean, I like Action Comics, like like we mentioned, but I wasn't reading it at the time. I read it later. So I liked Action and I liked The Flash. That's true. I didn't read those at the time. I read those later. I did not like George Perez's Superman, and we can get to that later. I liked one book, and that was J.H. Williams III's Batwoman, because there was just so much, like, the Greg Rucka J.H. Williams III Batwoman before the New 52 is some of the best origin stuff I've ever read, right? Like, for me, the whole origin issues, the 3 origin issues are up there with Year One, Batman Year One. They're up there. And the artistic innovation in a Batwoman issue is just like off the scale. So I was really, really into Batwoman. I was really sad that Rucka wasn't back, that he wasn't coming back. But there was so much of it that just really leapt out at me, like visually. I thought Batwoman was a great character. I still really like Batwoman as a character. To the point where when the CW announced that they were launching a Batwoman show, I was disappointed because I was like, she deserves better than the CW.
We all do.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I think we can agree on that. Yeah.
And it went up to the point where Batwoman proposes to Maggie Sawyer. Oh, that's another thing. Maggie Sawyer's in it, like old Superman supporting character. Up to the point where Batwoman proposes to Maggie Sawyer. It's a solid run of issues. And then it goes off the rails, unfortunately. But that was it for me, basically.
Very interesting. So, Lamar, what were your favorite books at the time?
For this is for the original run, right? Because there was a World's Finest run that came later. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll talk
just,
about that
just
later.
those first 52.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Lamar, how about yourself?
Outside of the ones we already mentioned, I thought what was the one?
Green Lantern
was the the Green Lantern I was getting at. The Batman book was really, really good.
Didn't Sinestro have a book at this point in time?
Yeah, he
was the star of Green Lantern.
Yeah, he took over Green Lantern for a while. Yeah. And it was funny because he basically, his time taking over Green Lantern was just him interacting with random Green Lanterns, and then like he was even like, because this is when, you know, this period where he's trying to be a Green Lantern again, and so, you know, he's wearing the green ring and all of that, and then like he'd run across like a Sinestro Corps member or something like that, and they'd be like, "Hey, wait a minute, you know, you're a Green Lantern? Oh man, I gotta tell somebody about this." And the next thing you know, he just kills them. Like, so like his book is filled with stuff like that. Like it's great. It's real good reading. And the art's great on it too. Doug Mankey was on the art for that. So that was good. It was a lot of books that I got and like dropped out of them, like the Hawkman book, you know, like I was getting that for a while, and then I kind of stopped reading it. But to go back, because I gotta mention this, because this is even like, you know, for the Flashpoint era, even though it came out in 2011, the one-shot joint, the Canterbury Cricket, I gotta mention that because I love that comic, and it's only one comic, you know, created by Mike Carlin and Rags Morales, and it's basically about this guy named Jeremy, and he comes through when in England, when the Amazons come and try to take over England. And so he basically has been praying for superpowers, and then he gets turned into a cricket, and then he's basically like an anthropomorphic cricket, and he leads the resistance against the Amazons. And then, you know, like because they join with Aquaman and Atlantis and everything, and he has this resistant movement called the Ambush Bugs. So
wow.
you know, yeah, so you know, I had to mention that. Even though it's a little before the new 52, I had to put that out there. Shout out to Mike Carlin and Rags Morales for coming up with that, because they don't make foolishness like that no more. But
wait, are you done, Lamar? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm finished. Yeah.
Right. There were actually like two other, like now that I'm looking at this, right? Like there were actually two other books that I enjoyed, although I didn't love it. Wonder Woman was one because of the Cliff Chang art. I felt it was, Azarel was kind of hit or miss for me. And I feel like if Cliff Chang hadn't been drawing this, it would have been a miss. So, but you know, it was fun for what it was. And I do think I have an interview up with Cliff Chang where he basically says this was basically like a Vertigo type of Wonder Woman pitch, that it was just supposed to stand on its own. The other one, for the first 7 issues of its run, is Nightwing.
No question.
By Kyle Higgins and Eddie Barrows.
Yeah.
Excellent character work, excellent artwork, and then Batman punches him. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah. And I gotta say too, since you brought him up, Eddie Barrows is one of the most underrated artists, like even right now. His
I agree.
He's really good. Really good.
Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah. I agree with that.
I want to talk about that Wonder Woman run for a bit, actually, because I really love that run. I think it's fantastic. And it looks so great. Cliff Chang's art is incredible on it. And it's exactly what it is. It's like Vertigo Wonder Woman. And I love how the Greek gods aren't beardy guys sitting on clouds. You know, I love how like each one of them is like like isn't Hades? Isn't he got all candles on his head?
Yeah, yeah.
And like
Yeah.
Poseidon's a great big octopus monster, and yeah, but they just look so great. Um, but it was, even though it was really dark and they were emphasizing the warrior side of Wonder Woman, there was still like, you know, proper Wonder Woman peeking through as well. Like, I'm sure there's storyline in it. Do correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while since I've read it, where she's shot by Eros's guns and she's betrothed to Hades because, you know, you're in love with whoever you see after being shot by the guns. But the kind of loophole that Wonder Woman uses to get out of it is that she loves everybody. So the guns don't work on it.
Of course.
Mhm.
Yes.
Which is lovely. I love that. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember
I
being
do
like really thrown off by it because the first issue of that Wonder Woman run had like decapitated unicorns and stuff, and I was like, this is pretty
Yeah.
heavy.
And there's one really controversial aspect to that run. And do you know what? In the
Yeah.
context of this run, it works. It works in this run, but it doesn't work for the rest of Wonder Woman, you know, for the wider character. And that's that she wasn't born of clay, imbued with the powers of the gods, like she's been traditionally depicted. The Azzarello introduced the twist. He introduced two twists, actually, that she was Zeus's daughter. Zeus and Hippolyta had sired Wonder Woman. And the second controversial
Zeus has children?
yeah, right.
Oh my goodness.
And the second controversial twist, which again works for this run but doesn't work anywhere else, is that the reason there are no men on Themyscira is that every time a male child is born, the Amazons cast them out. And the way that Amazons get pregnant is by attacking boats full of men.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe don't use this in all of the other stuff.
Well, this is it. This is the problem. You know, that both of those things work for this specific Vertigo take on Wonder Woman, this run. But you can't base the Amazons in the wider DC universe on that premise because they're essentially bad guys then, aren't they? Like, you know? So, yeah, so it was a kind of mixed bag in that respect. But as a run in itself, I love it. I think it's good. So, let's talk about what disappointed us, what we didn't like. Zoe, would you like to go first?
Oh my goodness.
I think I know the first one you're going to bring out.
Let me consult my list.
Yeah, this is going to be a 3-hour box set show.
The first one I'm going to bring up, obviously, is George Perez's Superman. Why in the world would you give a legend like George the writing duties to Superman, as well as, if I remember right, the layout duties, which were gone over by, who was the artist?
Jesus Marino, was that it?
Jesus Marino, and then because I assume lateness, Nicola Scott, right?
Yeah.
So like the storytelling is George, but you don't tell him anything about it. You don't know which supporting, he doesn't know, like by his own admission, he didn't know which supporting characters he could use. He didn't know which supporting characters were alive or dead. He didn't know which villains he could use, so he came up with like generic villains. Like, he didn't know the status quo. The only thing he knew was that Superman was not going to be with Lois Lane, which is made explicit by the fact that in the first issue, Lois is explicitly sleeping with someone else. Like, and it's enough of a jarring move for Superman and Lois not to be together after all that time being married. But like, for her to suddenly be with somebody new and a schmuck is like, what are we doing here? Right? Like, why would you do this to your flagship character? And why would you do this to a talent like George? I have it boggles my mind.
Mm.
Right. So that's the first thing that disappointed me about the New 52. And being as that you're both Superman fans, I assume you're there with me.
Yes, yeah, no. Like, Grant Morrison got a lot of flack at the time for like, oh, why isn't he telling George what his plans are and rah rah rah. But if you think about it, Morrison, they didn't it's not their job to edit the line of superbooks, right?
100%
Their
not their job.
yeah, their job was to revamp Action Comics and revamp Superman's origin, right? And deliver this run that they presumably pitched. They're not there to tell George, what bits they're keeping and what bits they're getting rid of. That's the editor's job, and presumably the editor wasn't doing their job and was doing dirty by George.
And I don't understand it because the action run was happening in the past. So you couldn't, like, even if George had introduced things that were contradictory to what Morrison was doing, you could fix that later. And for me, the other thing was, okay, so I was also liking Nightwing, but when the first arc ends and he goes to the Batcave and Bruce punches him out so that he can get one of his teeth, which is fully explained in the Batman issue of the same week or something. That signaled to me that you can have as good a Nightwing run as you want, but DC is always going to derail it with whatever's happening with Batman. Which is a miracle that the Tom Taylor Bruno Redondo run is going as long as it is. And the third one, this is just from the initial run of the New 52. Is whatever it was that they did to J.H. Williams III regarding Batwoman marrying Maggie Sawyer. Like all of that stuff that Video said about no superhero should be married at all. No superhero should be happy. Like, I'm not sure that he meant that as a total thing, or if that was like a cover for whatever he was doing to that run. And I don't know why you would do that to, at the time, like a really critically acclaimed book. It just made no sense. To the point where J.H. Williams and Hayden Blackman left the book and like somebody else ended that book for them. Like it just at least let them finish the book, right? So those are the three big things for me. Well, and also the lack of a Justice Society.
Yes, yeah, that's true. I think there's a case to be made that move damaged Batwoman in the long run, because Batwoman was really big at the time. Kate Kane, that character, she was really big at the time. And I know she's had a TV series since then, but let's face it, that didn't really have much of an impact, I don't think. And where's Batwoman now? She's around. She's appearing in books, but nobody's excited about her the way they were at the time when J.H. Williams was doing stuff with her.
Right.
So Didio, whatever happened, that sabotaged that character.
Everything about Batwoman, about Batwoman from her introduction in 52 was like all about momentum, right? Like she was introduced in 52. There was a lot of press about it. People were really into it. And then she showed up, and then Greg Rucka and J.H. Williams did their run, and it was still momentum. And then Greg Rucka left, and magically the momentum was still there somehow. And then there was the marriage proposal, which was huge, right? That was huge. And then bang. Like, now you're right. No one's talking about Batwoman anymore. Like, no one knows how to kill character momentum better than DC Comics.
Yeah. And it's a real shame. And you have to wonder, like, well, maybe the TV series would have lasted a bit longer if there was a bit more excitement around that character. I don't know.
Possibly.
Yeah. So Lamar,
Mhm.
what were you disappointed by in that initial New 52 run?
Mhm. You know, with me, well, one thing I can tell you, and this is where my perspective comes from, because when I knew they were launching 52 books, I was like, "There's no way I'm buying 52 books a month. That just ain't happening." Right? So,
You're
so
right. You're right. That was overwhelming. It was like 52
yeah,
bucks.
yeah. I was like, "Yeah, I ain't doing that." So,
Now, Marvel may have been releasing 52 books, but at least I wasn't aware that it was 52 books.
Yeah.
right, you know what I'm saying? So I just was like, "Yo, yeah, I'm not doing that. I don't have the time for that or none of that." But so I was like, "Let me just try things," you know, because I'm always willing to give something a chance, especially if I like the creative team. Um, but I think the ones that like that, I wouldn't say I was disappointed. I'll say I wish it just didn't go down that way. Like the Hawkman book, for obvious reasons. There was no way I was going to continue to read that, as much as I love Hawkman. Um, and Hawkman had a lot of interesting things happen, like before that, like during Brightest Day and all of that, you know. And I kind of feel like it was wasted potential that they made with that. The Swamp Thing, you know, I was interested in, and then I just kind of fell off after a while, because I think that like a lot of the good stuff, it just wasn't sustainable. Like it was like once the arc is over, it's like, okay, what's next, right? And the next thing didn't come, and so that was the stuff that disappointed me. Along with the other things that you guys talked about, I'm fully on board with all of that, and you know, uh, screwing around the creative staff and going in and changing, you know, somebody will write something, and then, you know, editorial comes in and changes the story and makes it do this. It's like, if you're going to do that, what you got the writers for, you know? If you're
Yeah.
going to do that, you know. It was just, and a lot of my complaints, you know, really, it's more editorial stuff, you know, and not so much like the creative, because they have some really good creative teams that they
Yeah.
put together, and that I have to give them credit for, right? Um, but just not maximizing your creative teams because of some mandate that you just decided to employ, you know, just out of nowhere. You know, it's just that's kind of wild to me. And I think there were some really good ideas that got kind of cut short. But
Mm.
just to go back to it all, like what Dewey said earlier, when you start out DC Comics and there's no Justice Society, there's no JSA, you've cut your story potential in half just based on
Yeah.
that. There's only
Mm.
so far you can go just based off of that. And it was so damaging that when they tried to introduce it later, it didn't work.
Mm.
You know, you know what I mean? So it's because it's like, yo, we don't want the Justice Society in another universe or whatever, on another Earth. We want them here interacting with these characters. Like, you know, like you can't, like, after you've been doing that for so long, you can't go back to that. Not with not with
Mm.
not with the original guys. Like, you just can't do that, you know. And I think that that stalling out, that actually hurt DC in a lot of ways, subsequently. Um, that they still probably are feeling the ramifications from that, you know. And I just think the cutting off the potential for these other characters and these other stories, I think that really, everything we're talking about kind of falls under that umbrella, you know.
Can,
Yeah.
can, can we add to that? Not only taking out the Justice Society and Jack Knight, taking out Wally West,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. That should have
Like
never happened. Yeah.
the whole thing, like legacy stuff, is what DC unequivocally did better than Marvel at the time.
Oh, it's no
Like
question. No question.
ever, right? And you know what was happening in Marvel in 2011? Miles Morales was happening in Marvel in
Right.
2011.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you got rid of the thing that you were doing and you gave them a window. And now they've gone right through that window.
Oh yeah, yeah. They took that to the bank. Yeah, yeah. It's no question.
And that's because you fell asleep at the wheel.
Yeah. That was the problem with this revamp. It was brave, but it just left gaping holes, you know,
Mhm.
like you say, windows. Like on the and they weren't consistent with it either, which was weird. Like, completely revamping Batman truly would have meant getting rid of all the Robins, right? And certainly
Mhm.
getting rid of Damian Wayne, but they didn't do
100%.
that. So you had a weird situation where I remember watching this at the time. Scott Snyder was being interviewed online by fans,
Mhm.
responding to fans' questions about his upcoming run. And somebody asked him, like, well, if Batman's only been around for 5 years, how does Damian Wayne exist? And you have to see poor old Scott Snyder find a nice way of saying, I don't care. It's just like, I'm just going to keep on writing Batman with Damian Wayne and fair play to him, why should
Mhm.
he adhere to these arbitrary rules? But you got like the big books, Batman and Green Lantern at the time, not adhering to these arbitrary cut-off points and these arbitrary rules. But then Flash, Wally West has to get, they could have at least brought Wally West back as Kid Flash. That had been something, but
Mhm.
they just got rid of him altogether. And a character as big as Wally, that leaves a hole, that leaves a gap. And characters as big as the Justice Society characters, that leaves a gap as well. And they didn't, because it was so rushed, they didn't have anything to fill those gaps with, did they?
No,
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Right.
yeah, so it was a real shame.
they were
So that,
rushing everything and holding everything to a deadline.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It was a really bizarre way of doing it. And it's easy to say this in retrospect. And part of me respects them for being brave enough to say, no, we're revamping almost everything. But in retrospect, you wonder if, like, well, maybe you could have brought out a series of miniseries in their own time, like year one style miniseries that revamp the origins. And meanwhile, the books could just carry on as normal then. And
This
that would,
this is where I'm gonna remove the creative aspect of it, and I just want to talk about business really quick, right?
yeah, go
So
for it. Yeah.
like DC Comics is owned by Warner Brothers. In DC Comics, which is a corporation, if it works like every other corporation that I have ever worked for and or have worked with, these places have yearly financial targets, like yearly revenue targets. These places have targets for the year and plans for the year. So Dan Didio and Jim Lee, having just taken over from Paul Levitz, this is their first year as the publishers of DC Comics. My theory is that they went, what can we do to make sure that we meet our financial targets for this year?
Mhm.
Right? And then they do that. What is the next thing that they do the year afterwards? What is the thing that they have in the bank the year afterwards to make sure that they hit their financial targets before Watchmen? Right. So like this whole thing, the New 52, and frankly, most of Dan Didio's run as the publisher of DC Comics feels like a whole series of short-term wins that don't lead to
Mm.
long-term gains. That's what I think the problem was at the very core of it. Like he wanted to make sure that at the end of every year, he could say, I have sold the books that are justified to keep my job.
You know what? That this kind of brings up, and I guess Dan Didio is a whole podcast in himself, but this brings up the sort of interesting paradox of Dan Didio, because on the one hand, he is the guy that's, I'm doing this to sell books, I'm doing this to keep a roof above our heads. I'm doing this, for this purpose, and you can respect that. But at the same time, you see him making decisions that are clearly made. I mean, this is from my perspective. Who knows really what's going on? But from my perspective, they seem clearly made because he's a fanboy, like, and I'm a fanboy too, so he's always trying to kill off Nightwing, right? That's not financially motivated, is it? He's getting rid of Wally West completely, That's not financially motivated. A whole generation has just grown up with Wally West on the cartoon, you know? How is that financially motivated? That's a fan motivated thing, that is. So he's this guy who's like, and again, we started off this podcast talking about how he made a big decision, possibly motivated by spite towards the 52 series. You know? So he's this guy on the one hand who's got this reputation of making these hard-nosed financially based decisions, who's also completely colored by these sort of personal biases. So it's a very strange mix, isn't it? Like,
I think the no prize solution to that is assuming, like, is thinking that he would be the type of guy, and I guess I can see this. He might be the type of guy who thinks that whatever would sell to him is what would sell.
yeah.
It is not.
No, it is definitely not. So I think what Lamar was saying there about the sort of editorial interference, this makes it very difficult to critique the New 52, I think, because it's difficult to say how much of what went wrong was because of the creators and how much of what went wrong was because the creators weren't allowed to do what they planned to do.
Well, it makes it difficult to critique the creators, but it makes it really easy to critique the editors.
Well, that's true. So personally, I had a few disappointments with the New 52. I was disappointed with Green Arrow. I thought it was, you know, considering the creative team, you had a guy called JT Krull, who I'm not really familiar with, but you also had like Dan Jurgens and George Perez working on it too, and I love them both. But
not the first time. Not the first time George has inked Dan.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a very backwards feeling book, Green Arrow. It felt like a 90s book. Like you literally had villains in that first Green Arrow run that could have been 90s Marvel villains. There was a villain in that run called Stunner, who was a 90s Marvel villain. There was a villain in that run called Blood Rose, who was a 90s
Marvel villain.
Mm-hmm.
There was a villain in that run called Supercharge, and Supercharger was a 90s Marvel villain. So,
these are all Spider-Man villains.
These are all 90s Spider-Man villains, right? And you had Oliver Queen, who was a millionaire again, a billionaire rather, and he was supposed to be this very young, forward-looking hero. But they were kind of still writing him as cranky middle-aged Dolly. You know, they hadn't found the voice for young Green Arrow. So you had like young 20-something Green Arrow lecturing people about like moral issues in the way cranky middle-aged Dolly used to do. And it didn't work coming from this character in his 20s. It was just like, who's this guy? Like, yeah. So I was really disappointed with that run, despite loving the creative team. And I was really disappointed with the ones you mentioned as well. Superman by George Perez. That was such a shame.
Ah, my goodness.
Yeah. And I was disappointed with Legion of Superheroes because there is no reason Legion should have been bad. Because Paul Levitz was still writing Legion. And he had been writing Legion just before the New 52. And just before New 52, it had been really good. I was really enjoying it. And then all of a sudden, and I'm really sorry because I've got so much respect for Paul Levitz, but all of a sudden after the New 52, Legion became this incomprehensible jumble. You know, there was no attempt to make this new reader friendly, which is bizarre because the previous run was new reader friendly, but this was just hard sci-fi, hard future 31st century politics. No, all these characters thrown at you. No attempt to say who was Chameleon Boy, who was this character, why were they the Legion in the first place. A friend of mine bought the first because he bought all 52 issue ones, which is pretty amazing. A friend of mine did. And he read issue 1 of Legion and he said, I couldn't make head or tails of it. It was completely incomprehensible. And it was almost incomprehensible to me. And I'm a Legion fan who had been reading Paul Levitz's run. So
it's a little incomprehensible to me because from what I understand, like Batman and Green Lantern, the Legion did not undergo a reboot, right?
it did not undergo a reboot. It just, so I don't know why it suddenly had this drop off in quality with the new 52. There's no reason for it. Because there was no reboot for the Legion. I think they had one sentence where, oh, we can't call Superman and Supergirl anymore because of Flashpoint. And that was it. That was the only mention they made of it, which is fine. That's a good way of doing it. But yeah, it's absolutely bizarre. And then the spin-off title, Legion Lost, written by Fabian Nicasia.
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce his name?
I don't know.
Oh, apologies if I'm not pronouncing it properly. Fabian Nicasia. And that was disappointing too, because again, it was this very 90s feeling book, very sort of it didn't feel like a new forward facing book. It was a 90s writer writing a 90s feeling book. So I was very disappointed with both of those.
Didn't it have Tyrock in it?
I'm not complaining about that. I love Tyrock, but they made him very generic. He was because
I don't know if the things that made Tyrock not generic have aged well.
No, they haven't. But I'm not saying they should have kept massive afro and disco outfit. Yeah, that if for those of you who aren't familiar, Mike Grell hated the character so much in the 70s that he deliberately made Tyrock look like that to sabotage the character because he felt the premise of the character was so offensive. And I think he was onto something. But I think
he was. It was offensive, yes.
It was offensive. Yeah, it was offensive. But I think a modern version of Tyrock could be quite interesting. And this guy wasn't, he was just you couldn't pick him out of a crowd, So I was just really disappointed with those books. So they were the big disappointments for me. And I don't know why Legion didn't work. Answers on a postcard, because I have no idea.
I think I want to call out a few titles that we haven't mentioned either in terms of, because I guess we weren't reading them, but I think that I am a little surprised that Voodoo had a series. Right, Voodoo from Wildstorm had a series as one of the first waves, right? By the way, as 90s as everything gets, and as 90s as some of these creators are, I feel like the 90s name that hits me the most as like that's from the 90s is Ron Mars. I don't know what that is. I hear Ron Mars and I think of the 90s. Sorry, Ron Mars. And I think it's weird a little bit that Birds of Prey was around and Suicide Squad was around, but Gail Simone was not writing either of them. Gail Simone was writing Firestorm and Secret Six. Eventually, Secret Six came back out. Batgirl, I feel okay. Batgirl, that's another thing, right? That's another thing that the New 52 did, which was bring Barbara Gordon back to an ambulatory state.
Do you feel that the only reason that worked is because Gail was writing it?
I feel like it
work?
I mean, you still see people today like complaining that she's still walking.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't really know how I feel about that, because I feel like Oracle was such an important character, and I feel like she was a great character as Oracle. On the other hand, I do feel it is kind of insulting that Batman had his back broken and was walking again in like 6 months.
I feel like Babs has a lot to offer as Batgirl as well. And we're seeing that as recently as the current Nightwing run, She works
both.
as Batgirl.
Yeah, she's both Batgirl
she works
and Oracle.
As both. And she works as both, and I kind of like the current approach that she's both.
I do too. Yeah, that would be my thing. Static Shock and the Blue Beetle, I feel like they were at least trying for representation among young ones here, and then they gave up.
Yeah.
Again, at the same time, Marvel was doing Miles Morales.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't understand. Okay. That's all I wanted to mention out of that first wave.
Something else that I'll mention out that
Wait,
first wave.
Lamar.
Oh,
Yeah,
go on. Sorry, Lamar.
I just want no, it's cool. I just want to say something real quick. What you were talking about the Gail Simone thing. I think also too when you talk about like the creative interference, um, there was just there was a lack of women like creatives, like all the way around.
Mm.
And there was a lot of foolishness that went on with that, subsequently. Like for example, we know Gail Simone was I'm gonna just say she was a victim of some of that, and y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm not even gonna get into all of that, but that seemed to have been a recurring thing, and it goes back to what we were talking about the the editorial stuff, and people letting their personal stuff influence like the business stuff to the detriment of the business.
Yeah.
I just felt like that went on for so long and for so strong. We'd be remiss not to mention it.
Yeah,
I agree with that. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? It was what the New 52 was an opportunity to do, and what they didn't do was get an influx of just more diverse talent, younger talent,
Yeah.
more racially diverse talent, more women, like you say. This was an opportunity to really surprise people with new talent. And they did it eventually with DCU, or they started to do it with the DCU initiative like a few years later. But by then, I feel like it was too little, too late.
A little bit.
And they really could have done that straight away, but instead they got, and I think this must have been, this is probably a product of like entrenched editors calling in their old mates, and also the fact that it was rushed. We got a lot of old hands coming in for New 52, which feels a bit completely contrary to what was intended.
100%.
Yeah. And it's a shame. It's missed opportunity.
I agree with that. Lots of
Yeah,
missed opportunities. Feels like they could have taken some more time to plan everything out.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And again, like we were mentioning Flashpoint earlier on, I feel like I want to bring this up, right? I feel it was wrong to attach the New 52 to Flashpoint.
Yeah.
I feel like
yeah.
I feel like it's become a bit of a millstone around the character Barry Allen's neck now, because he's the guy who messed around with time travel and wiped out people from existence, changed everyone's lives. And I know they've tried to backpedal a bit by saying, oh, it was Dr. Manhattan interfering and whatever since then. But ultimately, the perception is that Barry wiped his friends, his family from existence through a selfish choice. And it's a shame because I love Flashpoint. I think it's a fantastic story. It's a really good Barry Allen story. But that's Barry now. That's how Barry is defined to a generation of readers, as the guy who can't stop fiddling about with time travel.
I mean, they got 10 seasons out of a horrible TV show with that whole premise.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. But yeah, and as a massive Barry fan, I'm a bit sad that that's what Barry is known for now.
I get you.
And they based a movie around it.
I get
that
you.
movie's a podcast in itself. So
let's not ever.
Yeah, yeah. I get the impression that Jeff Johns originally intended Flashpoint to just be a Flash event. It wasn't intended as a big universe rebooting event, and it would have been a lot better. That story only works if things go back to normal at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and matter of fact, he said as much. And then, because he said the thing that was supposed to happen was that after Flashpoint was over, that the experience basically would lead like the speedsters and stuff to like work together more, and that there was supposed to be like a speedsters like team book or whatever with like different stories like every month with different speedsters and stuff like that. And they were kind of supposed to be like a loose team, where they were doing stuff together more, and
that would have been incredible.
yeah, that would have been wild, man. Yeah.
Oh, what a shame. Oh, there we go. So yeah, there we go. If they waited a year or two, attach this to a different event that they could have built up to, like a crisis event, you know, and it could have worked, you know, got these new creative teams in place, given them time to plan. I think it could have worked a lot better. But as it
Yeah.
is, we got 5 years, I think. That's right, isn't it? 2011 to
Been
2016.
around 5 years
Mhm.
of DC New 52 stuff.
Yeah, and then they brought in DC Rebirth, which basically was the cut-off point, I think, for
That
New
is
50.
100% the cutoff point for New 52.
Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
podcast in itself.
Yes, yeah. So we talked a little bit about it, but why didn't it stick then? Was it just the reasons we talked about, or was there anything else?
I want to ask before we move on, right?
Yeah,
Before
yeah.
we move on, I want to ask because we haven't covered this, right? The first few issues of that first wave, there were some comics, and I'm talking Catwoman and I'm talking Red Hood and the Outlaws,
Oh, you're right. Let's touch on this. Yeah.
that were pretty controversial because it was super sexed up. Like, what? So in Red Hood and the Outlaws, it's pretty much established that Starfire doesn't really remember lots of people, but she has sex a lot. And Catwoman, in her first comic, explicitly has sex with Batman on a rooftop. And I'm not talking like PG-13 rated sex. Well, maybe it's PG-13 now. I don't know. I'm talking we are
It's as explicit as you can get in a non-Vertigo book, isn't it?
yes, this is
Basically,
explicit as you can get in a non-Vertigo book. What did we think of these creative decisions?
it's embarrassing, isn't it? It is so juvenile because I've got no problem with sex in comics, and I've got no problem with sex in mainstream comics at all. You know, I'm not like that, but just don't make it like some 12-year-old boy who doesn't really know what sex is has written it, you know? It's just juvenile. It's such an embarrassing way of doing it, you know? Just having like and was it Kenneth Rocafort? I think that's how you pronounce his name. He was drawing Red Hood and the Outlaws.
Yes,
He's a great artist. I
he's a
really
great
like him.
artist. Yes.
But you know, he drew Starfire pushing her boobs out, you know.
Let's be clear here. Starfire was always a pretty sexy character, right? Like she was always like her sexuality was always played up, but not like this.
Not like this. And yeah, let's not pretend that George Perez was any stranger to certain fetishes. That
No, yeah.
no.
You know
But
that.
I feel like, you know, he did that sexiness very well, you know. But I don't think it was done very well in Red Hood and the Outlaws. Like I said, it was done in a very sort of childish way. Very childish, very men-focused, male gaze kind of way.
Very
And
prepubescent.
yeah, prepubescent, and you know, this is all very well for your teenage boys, but as a man who was in his 30s at the time, I was a bit alienated by it. So, you know, and I'm like I was a straight man in his 30s, you know. So how are like women supposed to feel reading these books? You know, it's just like you might as well put a sign saying, if you're not a teenage boy, this book isn't for you. Don't bother buying it. It seems to me bad from a business point of view, you know?
My take is the Starfire thing is terrible. The Catwoman thing is, I wonder if it did, like, if there is a segment of people who were into it because they thought Batman was hot.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, I mean, I will admit, I mean, I think it's just because it's so brazen, isn't it? It's a bit embarrassing, the Catwoman one. You know, it's just so like, yep, we're gonna have sex on this rooftop, though. But it's sort of done in a specific way that, you know, she's on top, you know. And he's very much just lying back and has to let it happen, kind of. Well, he wants it to happen, let's make that clear. But you know what I mean? He's the sort of He's what the kids call the bottom, isn't he? No, actually, that's something different, isn't it? That didn't happen.
And Lamar, what did you think of these things?
Paulie, you good, bro?
I don't know. I've made it sound more explicit than it is through a clumsy use of a word.
Oh,
Carry on.
oh man. Yeah, I echo you guys' sentiments. It's just it's sometimes as one of my favorite MCs, Bahamadia said, it ain't what you do, it's how you do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in that particular case, there was obviously some bad choices made, and I think that whole edgy thing, it comes back to haunt you, like quick sometimes. And I think that was one of those times where like it has the opposite effect and like what Paulie said, he was saying it's like this is like what a adolescent boy, like whatever their ideas about sex are that they probably didn't get the right way. It's like when you read those stories, that's what you were getting, right? And I don't know, I kind of wanted to know, like, why would you like want to do something like that? Like, because it goes through channels, right? So like you write it up, you draw it up, and then people look at it and they decide whether it's good to go, and so it seems like everybody was on board with it. And it's just kind of like how it gets there is one of those things where I just was like, like, what were you guys thinking about? Because that kind of stuff is like, if you want to try to go the whole empowerment role, that kind of stuff is not empowering, to anybody.
No.
You know what I mean? It's just, it's gratuitous, and it's really not, it's not appropriate for the material, and stuff like that. Like, it's a way to do stuff. Like, shoot, I mean, in the post-crisis Superman and Lois, it was well established that they were having sex and stuff like that, and they did it a certain, they handled it in a certain way, right?
Superman and Barda may also have had sex.
Yeah, well, see, this is what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And it's funny you say that, because when I heard about, because I wasn't reading either one of those books, so when I heard about it, that's actually one of the first things I thought about. And I was like, is this another Barda and Superman and what was the guy's name? Slug or something like that, or Sleeve?
Please.
There you go. Yeah, it's like, is it,
Jesus Christ, John.
I
swear.
So it's like, yeah, it doesn't serve the characters any. Like, if you're not serving the characters, it's probably not a good idea.
Possible counterpoint, the Suicide Squad in the New 52 is where Harley Quinn moved out of the Harlequin costume and into her more current look, or something more akin to her more current look, and it's also what catapulted her to her level of popularity.
Yeah.
So there's that's different though, right? Because Harley has agency, and Starfire does not.
No,
yes. It's funny you should mention Harley Quinn, because I was thinking a big part of the New 52, is that the first time she was a member of the Suicide Squad?
I think so.
Yeah, so that's a big change that stuck. That's really cool.
Yeah, she's just always in the squad now.
Yeah. Before we talk about legacy, though, something's just occurred to me that there's a few things that happened along the way before 2016 that I just want to touch on that we hadn't talked about. So first was I want to just mention some of the runs that came later in the New 52 that were really good and didn't come out of that first run. But maybe if, like we were saying, they delayed it a little bit, maybe these could have been part of that first run. So I want to talk about Jeff Lemire's and Andrea Sorrentino's Green Arrow, which I thought was absolutely spectacular. And that run is what should have started Green Arrow in the New 52.
I feel like
he-
we're gonna say that quite a bit with a later series stuff because
yeah,
right, because it was in fact so rushed, that first wave.
yeah. And the next run I want to mention that came a bit later was China Mayville's Dial H, which was absolutely fantastic. Just really fulfilling the promise of that character or that premise rather, in the sense that you just got the most bizarre one-off superheroes dialed up. And my favorite was Cock a Hoop, who was a hula hoop, who was also a chicken. Actually, little side note there, at my workplace a few years ago, China Mayville came and did a signing.
Oh
They were,
wow.
they were promoting a book about the Russian Revolution that they'd written, and they came and gave a talk about it, and everyone was queuing up to get their like novels signed, and I was there with Dial H.
That's pretty cool.
And I was like, "Oh look, I'm really sorry. I know everyone else has got your books. Could you sign this for me?" And he was so lovely about it, and he actually signed it Soccer McGee, which is, as long-time DC fans will know, was the original Dial H Robbie Reed's catchphrase. So that is a
Awesome.
treasured possession of mine. So I just wanted to mention those two things, and I'm going to ask you guys in a minute what came later for you that you loved. But I also want to touch on Superman and Wonder Woman in a relationship and what you guys thought of that.
You can touch on
So,
that if you wanna.
well, so let's start with that one. That's the spiciest one. So, Duy, sounds like you would rather not think about that.
There's a whole thing about New 52 Superman that like past the Morrison run just rubbed me the wrong way. It didn't really feel. You know what it is? You know how in Heroes Reborn, Rob Liefeld had a Thor? And then it was so unlike Thor that when Rob Liefeld was fired from Heroes Reborn, and then they put Walt Simonson on the Avengers, the first thing Walt Simonson did was bring in original Thor. And then was like, everyone else in the Heroes Reborn universe is DC's Marvel's original person who just happened to be in this pocket universe, except for Rob Liefeld's Thor. Rob Liefeld's Thor is a byproduct of this universe, and the original Thor from Marvel is the Thor that Walt Simonson just brought in, which is exactly what happened with New 52 Superman.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought this up, because nobody could get on board with Morrison's vision for Superman. Nobody got it right. The closest we got to nailing it was Greg Pak and Aaron Kuder, who I think did a really good job on their Action Comics run. And I think they came closest to capturing the spirit of Grant Morrison's proactive, two-fisted, social justice Superman. But Scott Lobdell just could not get his head around it. I don't think he tried. Like, he had Superman give up working at the Daily Planet because he felt they weren't doing enough, and starting up his own blog so he could really do the stories that matter. And that's a good idea. That's really in keeping with Morrison's Superman. But then nothing happened. You never even saw Clark Kent write a story for his blog. That thread was never picked up on.
Yeah.
So nobody could really wrap their head, apart from Greg Pak, could really wrap their head around that version of Superman. And you're right. And it got to the point where, like, I'm not reading about Superman anymore,
Yeah, I feel that way for most of New 52 Superman, whatever, because I was obviously on and off for it. So Superman with Wonder Woman, like, I am not against the idea of Superman dating Wonder Woman. That is one of the things about the Byrne and Perez run from the 80s. Like, they had a thing for each other and then they kissed once and that was it. And I feel like that could have been expanded on a little bit. So I'm not against it, but at this point I just didn't care.
Yeah. So much of New 52 Superman was setting things up and not delivering on it. And I feel Scott Lobdell did a lot of that. He set up something quite exciting. Like at one point, Lex Luthor had a scar on his face and Superman had a scar on his body, which hinted at some great battle they had had in the past. And nothing happened. We never found out about that. Superman was mates with a super scientist. I can't remember her name. Write in the comments if you can remember. But he was friends with this super scientist who lived in the center of the earth. And to my knowledge, nothing came of that. Lois Lane was dating this character called Jonathan Carroll and was just friends with Superman, but they had a little bit of tension, but it was just friends. Nothing came of that. We never even found out anything more about this Jonathan Carroll guy. And Superman and Wonder Woman. Yeah, do you know what the actual spin-off title they had that was written by Charles Soule for a bit wasn't that bad. He did his best with it, but ultimately nobody had anything to say about Superman and Wonder Woman together. You know, they set off this idea, but nobody had thought, well, what are we going to do with that idea? Nobody had any ideas. That was my impression. And so, you know, I don't know if that means there's nothing you can do with it or if there is something to do with it and they wasted the opportunity, but it just came to nothing. It was a waste of time and it's such a shame.
Maybe they can get married and she can change her name to Superwoman and then they can have like horrible kids. I don't know.
What kind of writer would come up with something like that?
I don't know. I have no idea.
What were your thoughts on it, LeVar?
I kind of feel like I didn't really care from the jump,
Mm.
you know, because that's just not something that ever crossed my mind like that. You know, so I just was never really all that invested in it. And you know, so I wasn't against it, right? But I kind of felt like if you're gonna do it, you got to do it right, you know, and it can't just be because hey, you know, when I was a kid, I thought that Superman and Wonder Woman were boyfriend and girlfriend, right? It can't be that. Like you have to kind of there has to be something there, and I just wasn't interested in the take that we got. So, you know, honestly, I was just kind of ambivalent to it. You know, I didn't care one way or the other. So I just kind of, you know, I was like, even like in the Justice League stuff, like, you know, like it was just something I didn't really care about all that much. And for me, I'd rather dislike a decision with something like that than to just not care. Right. And that's kind of where I found myself at. I didn't care, you know.
Yeah. That's the most damning thing of all, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's not even provoking a really strong reaction. It's just like, there's nothing to say about this.
Yeah. It's
No.
just like, it's just, you know, because at least if I don't like it, that means there's something that resonated with me in some kind of way, right?
Yeah.
If I'm just kind of ambivalent to it, then, you know, like you said, that says something.
Yeah, it's just a boring. It's boring. Like Superman and Wonder Woman. This is again another podcast in itself. It's a boring idea. Like it's so obvious an idea that it's boring.
Yeah.
The reason people like Batman and Wonder Woman together is because it's not an obvious idea.
Yeah. I think as well, and maybe this was just me in retrospect, because I was willing to give it a shot at the time, but in retrospect, as a long-time reader, I've spent decades reading about Superman as a sort of brother and sister. And then to see them together, it felt a bit icky in a way. Like, you know, it's because they've spent so long telling the reader that they're like brother and sister, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe that wasn't a problem for new readers, you know, maybe that's just a me thing.
There's a whole legendary Wonder Woman issue by Phil Jimenez where she tells Lois Lane, right? Like Clark Kal is like a brother to me. We once spent 1,000 years together in another dimension, and he never made a move.
Yeah. So I mentioned Green Arrow and Dial H there. Were there any books or runs that came later on that resonated with you guys? So Lamar, was there anything that came out later in the New 52 that you liked?
Let me see. Name some stuff that came out later.
There was Earth 2,
Mhm.
off the top of my head.
there was Grayson.
There was Grayson. I like Grayson. I quite liked I thought it was good. There was Omega Men, Tom King's Omega Men. That was good. I like that anyway. There was
There was Larfleeze.
There was Larfleeze.
Oh shit! I forgot the Red Lanterns had their own thing to kick everything off.
They were from the start.
Yeah,
The Red Lanterns.
There was Sinestro.
There was Sinestro. That's right. He had his own book for a while. There was the Superman Wonder Woman book. There was a World's Finest book that came out.
There was Harley.
Also,
there was Harley Quinn.
So I get the feeling that none of these really grabbed you.
Well, I did like the Omega Men joint that you were talking about. I
yeah.
did like that. I just couldn't remember where it came out at. You know what I mean? So I was just having a hard time recalling like with the timeline because they were switching stuff out so much. It was like they throw a new book out, and then a couple months later it was gone. Right? I'd only have 2 or 3 issues. You know, so it was kind of hard for me to kind of keep up with that. But yeah, I enjoyed that, and
there was a new Suicide Squad.
There was,
Yep.
I think that might have been one of the only books to do anything with the Daniel West version of Reverse Flash.
Okay.
I think he popped up in a Suicide Squad book, but he's not been used since, unfortunately.
Yeah, they put him on shelf after that.
Yeah.
There was a Batman Superman book with Greg Pak and Jay Lee.
Yeah.
That was pretty good. I did
get that. Yeah, that was dope. Oh, also, I meant to mention earlier that the OMAC book. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, like because I like the art in that book was wild. Yeah, that was good. That was good. I enjoyed that.
I heard good things about that. Yeah,
that was dope. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, good.
I was just gonna say I should mention an event that happened kind of halfway through the New 52, which I loved, was Forever Evil. I really loved that event. I thought it was because it was really Lex Luthor focused, and I love Luthor.
Yeah,
and it was Jeff Johns, so I thought that was great.
Yeah, that I enjoyed that. Like, cause wasn't that the one that? Cause didn't they like they exposed Dick Grayson's identity?
Yeah, that's it.
And that's what's like the central thing of the story. And they had him tied up or whatever like that, and all of that. Yeah. I enjoyed that. I wish that they would have done more with it afterwards.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. Because just things got a little crazy after that. Because I thought exposing Dick Grayson's identity. I never think that kind of stuff is a good idea. Personally.
Weird.
Right. Yeah. It's just I never think it's a good idea. But that particular story was one of the good things that came out of that whole thing.
Yeah, I must admit, I did enjoy Grayson. I thought it was a really fun book. You know, Dick Grayson as a spy.
One of the earliest Tom King works, I think.
Yeah. Although it did seem to be born of like Dan Didio kind of saying, "Well, do something with him. If you're not going to kill him off, then make him different." You know. Yeah.
Is it a coincidence that Didio leaves and we have like the best Nightwing run of all time?
Yeah, but this is it. I mean, he was pushing that character down a bit, I think. But well, let's talk. I think we've talked about the flaws with the New 52.
Wait. This is where I'm gonna mention Power Girl and Huntress World's Finest by Paul Levitz, George Perez, and Kevin McGuire splitting the art duties. George and Kevin McGuire splitting the art duties, which was pretty good. I think Kevin, if I'm remembering right, handled the civilian scenes and George handled the action scenes.
Nice.
Fairly good comic. Really nice because Power Girl and Huntress came from the New Earth 2.
Yeah.
So but they were on Earth 1 hiding their existence from the rest of the DC universe. I thought it was a pretty cool idea, but something happened in the 5th issue, which is pretty much what made me go like, that's it. I'm just not giving DC any of my money until all this crap is over. Which
Oh
is
no.
a very simple thing, and I'm sure it was human error and an honest mistake, which is in the solicitations for World's Finest #5, they said that Jose Luis Garcia Lopez was going to be on art duties. So I picked that comic up, and he was nowhere to be found. It was a mistake. That get it. It's human error. It's an easy mistake, but at that point in time, it was like you can't even fix this.
Well, this is it. This is what it comes back to. Rushed. Everything was rushed. You know, and they were making these mistakes because it was all so rushed.
And that's when I
Chaotic
was
is the
done.
impression you get. Yeah. Yeah. You do get the impression that everything was chaos at the time. And maybe it still is now, but it's not giving off that impression as much, you know?
Yeah. I mean, now I feel like, I feel like it's a little bit more coordinated now.
Yeah.
I feel like there's less these days, less of a one person at the top pulling all the strings, which frankly is probably, after all of that stuff, probably what DC needs. They'll probably need somebody to right the ship, to drive the ship into one direction eventually. But yeah, that's it.
I do feel like, and this is where this brings us on to our next bit, the legacy of the New 52 and what's happened since. I feel like these days, DC are writing for a wider audience. You know, they're writing for fanboys like us, but they're writing for people in their 20s, people in their teens. They're writing for, not just straight men in their,
in their
20s,
40s,
in their 40s. They're writing for all kinds of people now. And I think that's reflected with people I'm speaking to about comics, in my comic book store, in the comic book store I visit every week, and online. I feel like I'm speaking to a more diverse range of people, and I'm speaking to people getting genuinely excited about DC in a way that they weren't in the New 52,
Well, it's because all of the New 52 are aimed towards us.
Yeah, that exactly. Yeah, exactly. And nowadays, it feels a bit more like there's something for everyone,
By the way, I say us, and I mean us demographically, not even just like us specifically, because
us demographically,
I obviously am not a fan of the New 52. So
yeah, they weren't writing for you specifically. But
yeah.
I mean, let's face it, if we're talking specifically, they were writing for me, right? They were writing for straight, white male who started reading comics in the early 90s. That's who they were writing.
Using the creators from the 90s.
Yeah.
Using the characters from, like the tone of the 90s, etc.
Yeah. And also, in this, in the sense that, America, UK, the traditional sort of Western world, they were writing for that, which is, it's all very well if you're me, I suppose. But it's not a way to run a comics industry, is it?
Probably not. No, you probably want a diverse range of audience, which you get by getting a diverse range of talent.
Yeah. Exactly. Which we're starting to see more of now, I think,
Yeah.
But what's lasted? What have we still got, like, creatively speaking, story-wise? Is there anything? I mean, we mentioned Harley on the Suicide Squad. That's lasted.
Harley on the Suicide Squad has lasted. Harley's new look generally has lasted. It's made her bigger than ever. Like, Harley on the Suicide Squad with that look is what catapulted Harley Quinn to superstardom. It's not like she was a superstar in 1995 or whatever. She was just like well loved, right? Here's one that's lasted, and I think we don't think of this character as a New 52 creation. Jonathan Kent.
Yes. Yeah, and he kind of came about at the arse end of the New 52, didn't he?
Yeah.
Came about on the ass end of New 52 in an event called Convergence, which is all about the multiverse. So he doesn't even come out in the New 52 universe, right? It's not even his first appearance.
Yeah.
But for whatever it is, Convergence is a New 52 event. Jonathan Kent made his debut in the New 52 when Superman, Lois, and Jonathan Kent eventually show up in this Earth and take the place of old Superman, and somehow so do all of their supporting characters. Like, it is New 52, and Jonathan Kent has lasted.
Yeah, that's true. I actually I want to speak a little bit about Jonathan Kent now because I was saying earlier on about how Morrison created a relevant Superman for our times, and they did that really well. And I think John is the thing that has stopped Superman from being a step back, because obviously they stepped back from Morrison's version of Superman, and they brought back the old Superman, they brought back the old Lois, and they're married and they're kind of closer to middle age. But what makes them relevant to this time is John. John is what makes Superman for the future, because he represents hope for the future. He represents things are bad now, but they can get better, And this is why, and I might be causing a stream of negative comments to your channel here, so I apologize. But this is why I like that they aged up John Kent. I feel like the character of John. I'm so sorry. Right now, people are. But I feel like the character of John Kent has more to say about the world we live in as a 17-year-old than he did as a 10-year-old. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, and obviously, like you can have love interests with John Kent that you can, as a 17-year-old, that you can't have as a 10-year-old. The thing that I want to go back to Clark Kent, which is that the reason New 52 Superman, among other reasons, that didn't work for me is because Superman is not your buddy, right? Superman is not, he's not Peter Parker. He's not the guy that you can imagine yourself hanging out with. I think Superman's your dad. Superman's your ideal dad. And it's brilliant of Dan Jurgens to be like, well, then let's just make him a dad.
Yeah. And I would go as far as to say, and this is really controversial, and I don't mean any disrespect when I'm saying it. I feel that, like, when John is 10 years old, he's written for people our age who have kids and want to see themselves in this family dynamic. But when John's a 17-year-old, it opens up John and the world of Superman to more readers, to younger readers, and just more readers in general.
I agree.
Yeah.
Oh no, we're really gonna get hate comments.
I know, I'm really sorry. So yeah,
Lamar, do you like him aged up? Do you like John Kent aged up?
Yeah, what do you think, Lamar?
I'm gonna tell you like this. I really hate that you lost that dynamic with Damian, by them being the same age and stuff like that. Because that Super Sons book was wild. Like, I love that book, but I think they did more with him being 17 then, because I know, Bendis was the one that did it, right?
Yeah.
If I'm correct. Yeah. So I think that they ended up making a purse out of a sow's ear, so to speak, with that, and just where they did with it. Because like I said, it opens up things more because you could tell more stories, with him as a young adult, right? That you couldn't tell with him as a child. And I think that his character has benefited from that. But at first, I wasn't really sure what they were going to do, or like why it was being done to start with, so I was dead set against it, because I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And at the time, it didn't make sense, right?
I mean, you're right. It's like Bendis aged him up, but it's not like Bendis is the one who did things with him
Right, right.
afterwards, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's my point. That's my point.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he wasn't responsible for that, but they could have like dropped the ball, or they could have just put him back into age he was, right? Because they aged him up the first time, they could put him back, but they just decided to keep him and just to run with it and do things to develop the character, which made him a better character than he was, as a child, because he just was kind of there. He was Superman's son, and Superman kind of had this son like off panel, right? So, and when he pops back up again in Convergence and everything, it's just like he just has his family, and which I do give them credit for not breaking up that family. You know what I mean? Because they could have done that. Been like, yeah, you Superman again. We're gonna get rid of the kid. But I think that was a good idea, and they built on that. And that it seems like after Bendis left the book, and they focused on, okay, now we have the 17-year-old. What are we going to do? It's almost kind of like how they picked up. It's weird. It's like they picked up where they left off with that, right? With him and his family unit. He was happy with his family, right? And so now he has this 17-year-old son, and it gives him a challenge he's never had before, right? And so, like, this is one of the few things that you can give Superman, because in a lot of ways, it's like, okay, you had the best dad ever when you were growing up. Now it's your turn to do that, right?
It's your turn to be the best dad ever. Yeah.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying? And that's one thing you can give Superman a challenge with month after month after month after month, and it also gives room for Superman to do that when his son is older, right? So, it's just, it makes the whole Superman mythos better.
Yeah.
Since, because they actually did right by the aging up. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, so John is a legacy of the New 52, can be seen as one. I'm going to say another legacy of the New 52 now, which is a good or a bad legacy, depending on your point of view. And that's the Justice League Snyder Cut is basically the New 52 in movie form, isn't it?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
And I like that. I don't know if anybody else does.
Everyone wants to see me and Paul arguing about it for a couple of hours. I will put a video at the end of this. I'll put video link at the end of this video.
Yeah. But from that as well, from that Justice League, I think Cyborg really got a big push in a positive way. I think it's I think Cyborg is, and people have, since Jeff Johns' Justice League run on Cyborg, people have taken Cyborg and done more things with him and pushed him forward further than Jeff did, but that initial push came from Jeff's Justice League run.
True.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, as much as I think putting him on the League was a bad idea, the subsequent stuff that came later, he really needed that character development. Yeah. So I was, so that was one good thing that came out of it. Yeah, definitely.
It's just such a fanboyish thing, though. It's like, oh, who can we put in? Oh, I like the Teen Titans, right? It's just like a fanboyish thing to putting Cyborg into the into the Justice League, right? Like,
and and the funny thing about that, he said the reason why he did it is because, remember, Cyborg was a member of the Justice League on the Super Friends cartoon. The Galactic Guardians, you remember? Yeah, and Ernie Hudson was the voice actor for him. So, so I feel him on that. You know what I mean? Like, if that's the case, I just think it, doing it, especially to slight the Martian Manhunter, I think that was ridiculous. But, like you said, they made the best out of it. Subsequent. And
I like how he kind of filled that Martian Manhunter role in a way, in that, like, Martian Manhunter connected them all through telepathy, and Cyborg connected them all through tech. which I quite liked. And I really liked the idea, which they never did anything with, that Cyborg can transport them around the place with boom tubes, but there's like a 1 in 100 chance or whatever that he's going to send them to Apocalypse.
Yeah.
So they were kind of gambling every time they used him for transport, which I quite liked. But they never did anything with that.
I have a New 52 legacy that I don't know if it's good or bad. And it's the idea that every Flash is aware of every reboot.
Yeah.
Like they have all of their memories from every previous reboot, and only the Flashes have this.
And so does Iris West, weirdly.
That whole circle, which is like what?
I like that because the Flashes are special, you know.
The Flashes are special regardless, Paul. What else is a legacy of the New 52? Do you guys remember that iVampire had a comic?
Yeah, that's a shame. I always meant to check that out because I heard good things about it. Yeah, I mean, there's loads of ones we haven't mentioned, like Animal Man was great, you know. That was really good. But in terms of legacy, I think I mean a lot of Batman stuff stuck around. Court of Owls, we mentioned that earlier on, how that stuck around.
But that would have happened with or without the New 52, though.
Well, this is a thing. I think a lot of stuff that happened in the New 52 might still have happened anyway. I think a lot of the Aquaman stuff would have happened anyway, because that's the direction Jeff Johns was headed in anyway with it. Certainly a lot of the Green Lantern stuff would have happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's one. The integration of the Wildstorm characters into the DC universe. So that's one, because in Birds of Prey right now, Zealot is a member.
Yes, of course. And Midnighter and Apollo have been popping up in Superman comics quite a lot.
Oh, really?
So yeah, they were because Morrison wrote Superman and the Authority, and that was really good.
Yeah.
And then in the Philip Kennedy Johnson's Warworld saga in Action Comics, which was fantastic, Apollo and Midnighter were a big part of that. So, and they were great, you know, they were really good. So yeah, that's a legacy, the New 52, certainly.
I like that in the New 52, where they got rid of the legacy hero, so Renee Montoya was never the question. Greg Rucka had a Lois Lane series eventually using you know pre-New 52 Lois Lane, but in the New 52 universe, where Renee Montoya is the question, no questions asked.
Well, this is ultimately where the DC universe is at the moment, and I think it's a good place to be. It's kept the best stuff from the New 52, Harley and the Suicide Squad, you know, stuff like that. Characters like Ted Kord are alive again with pretty much no explanation.
It's fine. It's fine. I don't need Ted Kord to have an explanation as to why he's alive.
Absolutely, yeah. So they've kept the best stuff, and they've just jettisoned the stuff that doesn't work, and that's how it should be. You know, we don't need a crisis event to explain it to us. It's just this stuff's working, we're keeping it. You know, this stuff isn't working, we shall never mention it again.
I just love, by the way, like I keep harping on it, I just love how they brought back pre-New 52 Superman Lois Lane, and then systematically, very slowly, like restored that entire Superman status quo. They killed off the other Lois Lane. Somehow everyone is back to the way they were. Like, I love it. I don't really care how it makes any sense.
No, and I think that's how it should be. You know, with ongoing superhero comics that are never going to end. You know, just if something's not working, just ditch it. You know.
Yeah.
If something did work, bring it back, and you don't have to make a big fuss about it. You know, it's just a project of these characters that keep rolling out month after month. It's fine, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm saying is, like, in that sense, creatively, the New 52 was a waste of time. What do you
Well,
think?
you said it. I didn't say it.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
go on.
going to say something that might be a
Yeah,
hot take, and I'm not going to expound on it because I think there's a whole other podcast. I don't particularly think Rebirth was the answer.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's it. I'm not going to expound on that.
Okay. So whether was New 52 a waste of time? I think I'm going to put that question out to you two then. And then I'm going to tell you what I think. Because I haven't decided yet. Lamar, was New 52 a waste of time?
Yeah, it was a waste of time, bro. You know what I mean?
Wow,
If you
just
ask
like
me,
no doubts on that one.
yeah, there's no question, no question to me.
Yeah.
It was a waste of time at best. It was a band-aid, and
Mm,
it probably saved some people's jobs, you know, I guess like in the immediate sense, maybe. But outside of that, the model was unsustainable, right? First of all. And I didn't think it was going to be 5 years before they had issues, like serious issues. But I figured it might have been 10. But yeah, I think that it accomplished what it set out to accomplish in the beginning with the sales numbers in the market and all of that. But
yeah.
after that, like, there's no way you can keep somebody buying a book 200,000 copies a month. Like, that's not, you can't sustain that over
Mm,
forever. Like, those days are kind of done, where you could do that,
No, we have
but
phones now.
yeah, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, so it's like, the book come out, and if I don't like, it's like now, like you said, we got phones, we got tablets, we got all that now. So if I don't feel like dealing with the people in the comic book shop, or I just can't wait to read the story, guess what? I ain't got to, and
mm,
I ain't got to pay for it neither.
Absolutely.
So, and of course, I'm not advocating that. I don't, save the comments coming in the chat about that. I'm just telling you that these are the kind of options people have now. So,
mm,
you can't sustain that now. You know what I mean? And that was never going to be sustained. So, from that perspective, yeah, I think it was a waste of time for especially for the creators, because
mm,
just in general, on top of them doing this, they had their time wasted by having their ideas like cut and
mm.
given a runaround. People doing books and don't know what characters they're allowed to use, and just all of that is like, yeah, so like, even during the process, you wasting people's time. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it qualifies as a time wasting practice, just in general, just based on that,
Yeah.
Waste of time, waste of talent. Like,
Yep.
The best stuff that happened in New 52 for the most part would have happened anyway. Like,
Yep.
all
Yeah.
the Batman stuff would have happened anyway. The John
Yep.
Kent stuff would have happened anyway.
Yeah.
All of the great stuff about J.H. Williams III's Batwoman was going to happen anyway. The
Right.
stuff that didn't happen because of the New 52.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm,
Like, all of that stuff, it would have happened. And then the stuff
yeah.
that didn't happen, and all this stuff, like this is the worst George Perez book I've ever read,
Mm,
and I love the man and will buy anything that he worked on. And it was the worst George Perez book I've ever read.
mm,
Right?
mm.
Yeah.
It's just like, it just made zero sense for the most part. I think the second half of New 52 was a lot better than the first half of New 52,
Yeah.
because it did feel like people were allowed to pitch things that made sense within that universe. But
Yeah.
for the most part, it's like, okay, like, well, you got me back for like a few months to read,
Yeah.
and then you lost me again anyway.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
is it better for me to just check it out of curiosity? I don't know. Like, like it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth right after.
Creatively speaking, not financially, but creatively, I agree. It probably was a waste of time. All the good stuff they could have done anyway. They could have just stuck Action Comics, Grant Morrison on Action Comics and said, this is Superman's new origin. They didn't need the New 52 to do that. Or they could have just done an all-star style maxi series in itself to contain Morrison's run. And that it could have come up, Rags Morales could have been given time to do every issue, and it might have been better, you know?
Same with Wonder Woman.
Same with Wonder Woman. We could have got, that could have been All-Star Wonder Woman or something, you know, Brian Azzarello and Cliff Chang on that. I think the only thing I can think of that maybe you couldn't have done was the Jeff Lemire's and Andrea Sorrentino's Green Arrow stuff.
Which didn't even kick it off.
Right.
But that didn't kick it off. That didn't even kick it off.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, creatively speaking, like you said, all the good stuff we could have got anyway, I think. They could have just said Jeff Johns doing, Justice League Secret Origin, and he could have done that same storyline,
Yeah.
And we could have, not seen these V-neck armor things.
Yeah.
Why, Jim? Why? I don't get it.
So yeah, I think lots of good stuff came out of that period, stuff that I really liked. But I agree. I think it could have happened in some form or another anyway.
It's like it came out in spite of the New 52 and not because of it.
Yeah.
A lot of it, yeah.
That's where I land on it.
And I think if they were going to do the New 52, they should have given it more time, and they should have got rid of certain editors maybe who were just calling their old mates, and got some blimmin' women to write it, and got some more, more queer writers maybe, just the stuff they've got happening now could have happened then, but it didn't. And it's
I didn't read Birds of Prey at the time, but if ever there was a book that was begging to be written by a woman,
yeah,
it might be a book about a woman team.
Yeah,
just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah, but I do feel like DC kind of got there in the end. Now that Didio's gone, we are kind of seeing that diversity now, and that sort of trying new things in a way that doesn't feel arbitrary.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so, yeah. Like it's much better now. Like not everything feels like a grim and gritty book. Not everything has like the same tone that it has.
Yeah.
They're trying new formats. There's that whole Wayne Family Adventures comic that's on Webtoon. They're gonna do these compact comics, which I have thoughts about, but it's a good idea on principle. I like it.
We're getting stuff. Just looking at Superman, we're getting like Action Comics and Superman are really good. We're getting the John Kent spin-off stuff, which is great. We're getting these sort of stuff like Superman Smashes the Klan and Superman Harvests of Youth.
Yeah.
And Supergirl being super. That these they're their own thing for their own audience, and they're absolutely fantastic. They're not just catering for the one audience all the time,
And you have mentioned Mark Waid's World's Finest.
Mark Waid's World's Finest, which it's not trying to fit into any sort of arbitrary continuity. It's just Mark Waid doing what he wants to do really, really well, and it's working,
Which is apparently selling so well that there's now a World's Finest Teen Titans. Like now he's got two books coming out in the same continuity. A Superman, The Last Days of Lex Luthor is coming.
Yeah.
Like there's so much Superman stuff right now. It's actually pretty cool.
Well, these what are they called? These Black Label books are working as well, I think, because and again, I'm looking at this in a very Superman focused kind of way because I'm a Superman fan. But you've got Superman Year One by Frank Miller, which I didn't personally care for, but that's fine. You know, that came out and it was its own thing. And then you've got Superman versus Lobo, which again was a very different thing under the Black Label. And then you've got, like you say, The Last Days of Black Luthor coming out under the Black Label, and they're all their own distinct things with their own distinct audiences, and they're all high quality in their own way, like, you know.
Not a Black Label book, but should have been Superman Space Age.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes. Superman Space Age. That was his own thing, and it was fantastic. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Excellent stuff. Like there alone, where that's one character, and we're talking about like a variety of tones and a variety of looks and a variety of teams, and that's what the New 52 should have always been about.
Yeah, that's what it should have been. And you feel like we would have got there sooner if it wasn't for the New 52, maybe?
I think so.
Yeah. Because they tried to get there. They did that DCU initiative, but like we said, maybe too little, too late. You know.
I think we could have gotten there sooner, because as much as I don't think Rebirth was the answer, I do think Rebirth was a step to the answer. Like you kind of had to reset.
Yeah.
So.
So, do you know what? This has turned out a lot more. Like, I have been a lot more negative about the New 52 than I expected to be. Because
that's just facts.
It's just facts, isn't it? It's just facts, yeah. But, you know, because I've always been like, there's a lot of stuff that came out the New 52 that I like. But, you know, I've kind of argued my way around to it, but like, maybe it sucked.
I'm glad you asked Lamar first if it was a waste of time, because I was really trying to be positive about it in my head, and then he just answered waste of time with no compunction, and I'm like, you know what? Why am I trying to be nice about this? Yes, it was a waste of time.
Before we wrap up, then, has anyone got anything that we haven't covered? Anything they want to add, or any final thoughts about any of it?
No, I'm good. I feel like I've said a lot.
So I just want to say then that anyone watching this or listening to this, if you want to leave in the YouTube comments that you disagree with us and you think the New 52 was a really positive thing and has had a positive impact on DC, do tell us and do let us know what you think, because I'd be very interesting to read that. You know,
feel free to tell us.
Absolutely, and no one here is going to say, "Oh no, you're stupid for thinking that." You know, I would actually love to do that, and do tell us your favorite books. You know, we've shared some of our favorite books from the New 52 run, some of our not so favorite books. Tell us what you loved from that run, you know, and why you loved it. You know, and what we haven't mentioned, because we're talking 52 books and the stuff that came later. Tell us what you loved about that in the comments. We'd love to hear it. Tell us what didn't work for you as well. And tell us what you think of DC at the moment as well. You know, we'd love to hear if you agree with us about what DC are doing right now. But in the meantime, I think click like and subscribe and that little bell thing. And tune in next time. From me, Lamar and Duy, thank you very much.
We'll figure out what to talk about next.
Yeah.